blood in the dust. A face from the dead. One man's buried past just crawled back to life. When hardened Apache tracker Cowboy finds a brutally beaten woman left to die in the desert, her face stops his heart. She's the mirror image of Leora, the woman he lost years ago. But this isn't her. This is Mara, Leora's twin, and she carries a secret that will shatter everything. Leora didn't just die. She was murdered for discovering a trafficking ring that's still running. Now the men who killed his past have come for her sister, and Cowboy must choose, run or finish what Leora started. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey reaches. The desert never forgave mistakes. Cowboy had learned that truth the hard way, carved into his skin by sun and stone, written in scars that mapped a life most men couldn't survive. At 43, he moved through the Arizona wasteland like a shadow-given substance, silent, purposeful, reading stories in tracks that others would miss entirely. His Apache grandmother had taught him to see what the land whispered. His years alone had taught him why those whispers mattered. The trail he followed that October morning was barely visible, just disturbed pebbles and a smear of something dark on a flat rock. Blood, maybe 3 hours old. He'd been tracking a mountain lion that had taken a rancher's calf 2 days prior, following the predator's path through arroyos and across sun-bleached flats where the temperature would hit 110 by noon. But this wasn't lion blood. Cowboy crouched, fingertips hovering over the stain without touching it. Too much volume. Wrong color in the way it had oxidized. He scanned the terrain with eyes the color of desert sand, weathered face utterly still. The wind carried nothing but creosote and dust. Then he saw it. 50 yards ahead, where the trail curved around a formation of rust-colored boulders, something moved. Not the organic shift of a living thing, but the desperate twitch of something caught between life and death. Cowboy's hand dropped to the Colt .45 holstered at his hip, an old habit that had kept him breathing through 12 years of solitude. He approached in absolute silence, boots finding purchase on stone, body low and angled. Every sense screamed ambush, trap, setup. The burlap sack lay in a shallow depression, partially hidden by sagebrush. It moved again, a violent spasm that sent up a small cloud of dust. The fabric was torn, stained dark with blood, and other fluids Cowboy didn't want to identify. Flies swarmed in the heat. No tracks nearby except the drag marks leading to this spot. Whoever had left this burden had approached from the rocky ground to the west, leaving no clear trail. Professional, careful, or at least experienced enough to know how to hide their approach. Cowboy drew his pistol, thumbing back the hammer with a soft click that seemed too loud in the desert silence. He circled the sack once, twice, confirming he was alone. Nothing moved except the thing in the burlap, and even that was growing weaker. "If you can hear me," Cowboy said quietly, his voice rough from disuse, "make a sound. A moan, barely human, soaked in pain." He holstered the Colt and knelt, pulling his hunting knife from the sheath on his belt. The rope binding the sack was thick hemp, tied with knots that spoke of hasty work and urgent purpose. He cut through them in 3 swift strokes. The burlap fell away. Cowboy had seen violence. He'd tracked men through these deserts who had done terrible things, and he'd found their victims in various states of ruin. He'd learned to compartmentalize, to separate the horror from the task at hand. But when the fabric pulled back and he saw the woman's face, something inside him, something he'd thought long dead, cracked open like a fault line. "No," he whispered. It was impossible. The woman was barely conscious, her face a ruin of bruises and cuts. Her left eye was swollen completely shut, a grotesque purple mass. Her lips were split in multiple places, crusted with dried blood. Somebody had beaten her with methodical brutality, the kind of violence that came from rage held on a leash. But through the damage, through the distortion of trauma and pain, Cowboy saw her. Leora. His hand trembled as he reached toward her face, stopping an inch away. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Leora was dead. He'd buried her 5 years ago in the small cemetery outside Prescott, had stood over her grave in the rain and felt something vital inside him die alongside her. Yet here she was, breathing, bleeding, dying in front of him. "Leora," he said, and his voice broke on her name. The woman's one good eye opened, fever-bright and unfocused. Her lips moved, trying to form words through the swelling and pain. "Not Leora." The words were barely a whisper, each syllable clearly agony to produce. Kael's world tilted. He leaned closer, cradling her head with infinite care. "What?" "Mara," the woman breathed. "My name is Mara." Understanding came like a punch to the gut. The twin. Leora had mentioned her once, years ago, in passing. They'd been estranged since childhood, some family fracture that Leora had never wanted to discuss. Kael had seen a single photograph, yellowed and creased, tucked in the back of Leora's Bible. Two girls, maybe 7 years old, identical except for the ribbons in their hair. "Mara," Kael repeated, forcing his hands to steady. "Mara, who did this to you?" Her eye rolled, consciousness slipping. "He knows." "I know." "Knows what?" "Mara, stay with me." "Leora found out. He killed her." The desert spun. Kael had to consciously lock his muscles to keep from reeling backward. "What are you saying?" "Leora died in a car accident. Murder." The word came out with startling clarity, driven by whatever reserves of strength Mara had left. "She found proof. Trafficking. He killed her. Staged it." Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Her breathing had gone shallow and rapid, the kind of pattern Kael recognized from too many dying things. She was slipping into shock, her body shutting down system by system. Questions hammered at him, each one critical, each one potentially her last chance to answer. Who? Where? How? But Kael had survived this long by knowing when to ask questions and when to act. He acted. "I'm going to move you," he said, shrugging off his pack. "It's going to hurt." Mara's eye found his face, and for a moment clarity surfaced through the pain. She nodded once, a tiny movement that said she understood, she trusted, she had no other choice. Kael pulled out his emergency medical kit, working with practiced efficiency. Field dressing, pressure bandages, trauma pads. He'd treated wounded men in worse shape than this, though never with hands that shook the way his did now. Not from fear, he'd left fear behind years ago, but from the sheer wrongness of seeing Leora's face attached to another woman's broken body. Not Leora. Mara, her twin. Her identical twin who was dying from wounds that spoke of systematic torture. He packed the worst of the bleeding wounds, stabilized what he could. She whimpered once when he shifted her ribs, feeling for fractures, but otherwise bore the examination with grim silence. Broken ribs on the left side, possibly a cracked sternum. Internal bleeding was likely. If he didn't get her to real medical help soon, none of this would matter. But taking her to a hospital meant questions, reports, police involvement. And if what Mara had gasped was true, if Leora had been murdered, if someone powerful enough to stage a car accident was involved, then showing up at a hospital with her identical twin might be signing both their death warrants. Kael made the decision in the space between heartbeats. He lifted her as gently as physics allowed, cradling her against his chest. She weighed nothing, a collection of bones and trauma that shouldn't still be breathing. Her head lolled against his shoulder, unconscious now, which was probably a mercy. The walk back to his canyon would take 4 hours at normal pace, carrying a critically injured woman through desert terrain in rising heat, avoiding the few trails that saw occasional hikers sticking to the rocky ground that hid tracks. That would take longer. Much longer. Kael started walking. The cabin sat in a box canyon 20 miles from the nearest road, hidden behind a formation of red rock that looked impassable until you knew the path. Kael had found it 7 years ago, a long-abandoned line shack from the days when cattle operations stretched across these wild lands. He'd rebuilt it stone by stone, creating a fortress of solitude where the world couldn't reach him. He kicked open the heavy wooden door as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. 6 hours. It had taken him 6 hours to get here, and Mara was still breathing. Barely. The cabin's interior was sparse, a sleeping platform built into one wall, a wood stove, shelves lined with supplies, a workshop area where Kyle repaired gear and cleaned the occasional game he hunted. Everything was scrupulously organized, maintained with the kind of discipline that came from years of military service before he'd walked away from all of that. He laid Mara on the platform, which held his bedroll and a single wool blanket. The medical supplies he kept in a locked chest had been supplemented over the years through careful acquisition. He'd learned early in his solitary life that the desert didn't care about your preparations, only your results. For the next 3 hours, Kyle worked with the focused intensity of a man fighting death itself. He cleaned wounds, stitched the worst of the lacerations, set up an IV line with saline and antibiotics scavenged from veterinary suppliers. Her vitals were weak but stable. No obvious signs of brain trauma beyond the concussion. The internal bleeding he'd worried about seemed minimal. She'd have been dead already if it was severe. But she remained unconscious, locked in whatever darkness the body retreated to when overwhelmed by trauma. As full night settled over the canyon, Kyle finally allowed himself to stop. He sat in his single chair, a battered thing he'd salvaged from a dump, and stared at the woman who wore his dead love's face. Leora had been the only light in his life after the darkness of his service years. They'd met at a veteran support group he'd attended exactly once, pushed there by a well-meaning VA counselor. She'd been volunteering, moving through the room with coffee and quiet encouragement. When she'd reached his corner, she'd simply said, "You don't want to be here." "No, ma'am," he'd replied. "Neither do most of them. But you're actually going to leave." "Yes, ma'am." "Before you do," she'd said, setting down a cup of coffee he hadn't asked for, "you should know that the canyon lands east of here are beautiful this time of year. Good for a man who needs space to breathe." She'd walked away before he could respond, leaving him with coffee and coordinates to solitude he hadn't known he needed. He'd found her 3 months later at a farmer's market in Prescott, selling honey from hives she kept. They talked for 4 hours straight, words flowing easier than anything Kyle had experienced in years. She understood silence. She didn't push. When he finally told her about the things he'd done in service, the blood on his hands that wouldn't wash off no matter how hard he scrubbed, she'd simply held his hand and said, "The desert forgives. Eventually." They'd had 2 years together. 2 years of something approaching peace, of learning to laugh again, of building a life that felt like maybe he deserved to keep breathing after all. Then the accident. A rollover on Highway 89, witnesses saying she'd swerved for no apparent reason, hit the guardrail going 70, and tumbled 200 feet down a ravine, dead before the first responders arrived. The police had investigated. Nothing suspicious. Just another tragedy on a dangerous road. But if Mara was telling the truth, Kale stood abruptly, pacing the confined space of the cabin. His mind, trained for tactical analysis, began sorting through implications. Leora had discovered something. Trafficking, Mara had said. Big enough that someone killed her and made it look accidental. 5 years had passed, plenty of time for whoever was responsible to think they were safe. Then Mara shows up. What? Following her sister's trail, finding the same evidence, and now she's beaten to death's door and dumped in the desert. Sloppy. Whoever did this got sloppy or arrogant or both. You don't dump a body in the open desert in broad daylight unless you're rushed or you think you're untouchable enough that it doesn't matter. From the bed, Mara moaned softly. Kyle was at her side in 3 steps. Her face had regained some color, the pallor of shock fading to something closer to natural. Her one good eye flickered open, unfocused and confused. "Easy," Kale said quietly. "You're safe. You're in my cabin, 20 miles from anywhere. Nobody followed us." Her eye found him, struggled to focus. When recognition came, it brought tears that spilled down her bruised cheek. "You're real," she whispered, "as real as you are. I thought I was dead, thought I was seeing Leora. I thought the same when I found you." Kyle adjusted the IV line, checking the flow. "How do you feel?" "Like someone used me for batting practice." The attempt at humor came out weak, but it was there. "How bad?" "Bad enough. Broken ribs, concussion, multiple contusions and lacerations, but you'll live if you rest and let yourself heal." Mara's functioning eye closed. "He'll find me?" Who? Darius Crow. The name meant nothing to Kyle. He filed it away, one piece of a puzzle he was only beginning to see. Tell me. Water first? He brought her water in small sips, supporting her head. She drank like someone who'd been dying of thirst, which she probably had been. When she finally had enough, she fell back against the bedroll with a grimace of pain. Leora was a social worker, Mara began, her voice gaining strength. Did you know that? She told me she worked with families. She didn't talk about work much. Because it broke her heart daily. Mara's good eyes stared at the ceiling beams. She dealt with the worst cases. Abused kids, trafficking victims, women fleeing violence. She saw things that would shatter most people. She was strong. She was. Strong enough that when she started noticing a pattern, she didn't look away. Mara paused, breathing carefully around her damaged ribs. Girls from troubled backgrounds, going through the system, getting placed in a charity house run by a man named Darius Crow. Everything legal, everything above board. He had references, certifications, funding from community organizations. But the girls disappeared. Not all at once, not in any way that triggered investigations. One would run away, another would turn 18 and leave the system. A third would get placed with family out of state. Except Leora started checking. The runaways were never found. The 18-year-olds had no paper trail after leaving. The family placements didn't exist. Kyle felt ice forming in his gut. How many? Leora documented 14 over 3 years, probably more before she started paying attention. And nobody else noticed? Crow was careful. He never took too many from one area. He spread them across county lines, jurisdictions, and he had protection. What kind of protection? Mara's eye found his face. The kind that gets a social worker's concerns dismissed, her reports buried, her credibility questioned when she pushed too hard. The kind that makes a car accident look like bad luck instead of murder. You can prove this? Leora could. She had documentation, evidence, names. She told me about it 2 weeks before she died. Said she was going to the state attorney general, bypassing local law enforcement, because she didn't know who she could trust. Mara's voice cracked. I was living in New Mexico then, working as a nurse. She called me, told me everything, said if anything happened to her, I needed to know where to find her evidence. Where is it? That's what I came here to find out. Leora said she hid it somewhere safe, somewhere only family would think to look. I've been searching for 3 months, following every clue she left. A tear tracked down Mara's bruised face. Crow's people must have been watching. 2 days ago, they grabbed me outside my hotel in Blackridge. That's where Crow operates? It's where his charity house is. A town of maybe 3,000 people, respectable community, good schools, perfect cover. Mara's breathing had grown labored with the effort of talking. They took me to a warehouse, 3 men. They wanted to know what I'd found, where Leora's evidence was. I told them I didn't know. They didn't believe me. She didn't need to elaborate. The damage to her body told that story clearly enough. How did you escape? I didn't. They were supposed to kill me. I heard them arguing about where to dump my body, remote enough that I wouldn't be found quickly, but not so remote that when I was eventually discovered, it would look like I got lost hiking. Her good eye met his. One of them, the youngest, he had qualms, kept saying this wasn't what he signed up for. While they were arguing, I played dead. They dragged me out, threw me in that sack, drove me to the drop point. The young one was supposed to finish the job with a bullet, but he couldn't do it. Told the others he'd done it, and they left. He spared you. He left me to die more slowly. I'm not sure that's mercy. Mara closed her eye. If you hadn't found me, but I did. Silence settled between them, broken only by the wind outside and the crackling of coals in the stove. Cale's mind raced through scenarios, options, strategies. He could take her to the authorities, try to get protection, launch an investigation into Crow. But Mara had already said local law enforcement was compromised. The state level might be clean, but getting to them meant transport, exposure, time for Crow's people to track them down. Or he could keep her here, hidden, while she healed. Let Crow think she was dead, buy time to figure out their next move. Or, And this was the option that sang in his blood with the voice of old training and older instincts. He could do what Leora had apparently been prepared to do. Find the evidence. Expose Crow. Burn his operation to the ground. "What are you thinking?" Mara asked quietly. Cale realized his hands had curled into fists. He consciously relaxed them. "I'm thinking you need to rest. We can talk more when you're stronger." "We don't have time for me to get stronger. Crow thinks I'm dead, which gives us maybe a week before he relaxes and goes back to business as usual. After that, he'll be watching for any hint that I survived." "You can barely move." "I can move enough." Steel entered Mara's voice, an echo of the same determination Kael had heard in Leora's tone when she'd made up her mind about something. "These men murdered my sister. They've been trafficking girls for years, destroying lives, and nobody has stopped them because they're protected and careful and smart. Leora tried to take them down and died for it. I came here to finish what she started, and getting beaten half to death doesn't change that mission." "It should." "Why? Because I'm weak? Because I'm afraid?" Mara's good eye blazed. "I'm both of those things. I'm also the only person who knows what Leora knew, who believes what she believed. You think I can just walk away? Hide and hope Crow never finds me? Hope he stops destroying girls' lives?" "I think you can stay alive." "For what? To spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, knowing my sister's killer is free? Knowing those girls are still disappearing?" She tried to sit up, gasped at the pain, but forced herself upright anyway. "Leora died believing someone would finish this. I refused to prove her wrong." Cale studied her, seeing past the bruises and damage to the woman underneath. Identical to Leora in appearance, but there were differences too. Where Leora had possessed a gentle strength, a quiet determination, Mara burned hotter. Rage fueled her, gave her a reckless edge that Leora had never shown. Or maybe Leora had shown it, in those final weeks before her death. Maybe she'd burned with this same fire, pushed forward by the knowledge of evil that had to be stopped. "Tell me about the evidence," Kael said. Hope flickered across Mara's damaged face. "You'll help?" "I'll listen, then I'll decide." It wasn't a commitment, but Mara took it as close enough. She sagged back against the bedroll, gathering her thoughts. "Leora told me she had physical proof. Ledgers documenting the girls, where they went, who bought them. Financial records showing money changing hands. Photographs of Crow with known traffickers. Everything needed to not just shut down his operation, but to expose the network protecting him. Where would she hide something like that? That's what I've been trying to figure out. Leora and we weren't close. Our parents divorced when we were 8, split us up. She went with our mother, I went with our father. We saw each other maybe once a year after that, always awkward, always more strangers than sisters." Mara's voice carried old grief. "When Mom died, Leora reached out. We started talking again, slowly building something, but we'd lost so much time. I don't know her hiding places, her secret spots. She must have given you something to work with. She said, 'Remember the angels.' That was it. If something happens to me, remember the angels." Mara looked at Kael helplessly. "I've been to her apartment, her workplace, every place I could think of. I even went to our mother's grave. Nothing. No angels, no clue what she meant." Kael felt something click in his mind, a connection forming. "Leora kept bees." "What?" "Honey bees. She had hives outside Prescott near where we—" He stopped, redirecting. "She called them her angels, said watching them work was like watching divine order in action." Mara's functioning eye went wide. "The hives. My God, the hives. Are they still there?" "I don't know. After she died, I never went back." "Where were they?" "Private property, an old orchard owned by a woman named Sarah Hendricks. She let Leora keep hives there in exchange for honey." Cale was already moving, pulling out maps from his storage chest. "Here, about 15 miles from Prescott." Mara tried to stand, made it halfway before her legs gave out. Cale caught her before she hit the floor, easing her back to the bed. "You're not going anywhere for at least 3 days," he said firmly. "Then you go, please. If the evidence is there, if it's been there for 5 years, it'll keep for 3 more days." Kael met her gaze. "But even if we find it, then what? We hand it to authorities who might be compromised? We can't trust local law enforcement. State level might be clean. But getting the evidence to them safely, protecting you as a witness, that's complicated. I don't care about complicated. I care about justice. Justice is a luxury of the living. If Crow finds out you survived, if he learns we have the evidence, he'll move heaven and earth to eliminate both threats. Cale ran a hand through his hair, thinking tactically. We need a plan that doesn't get us killed. Mara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more uncertain. Why are you even considering this? You don't know me. You could have left me in that desert. Instead, you brought me here, saved my life. Why? Cale looked away, jaw tight. Because you have Leora's face. Because when I saw you, for one moment I thought maybe the universe had given me something back instead of just taking. And because... He forced himself to meet her eyes. Because if what you're saying is true, Leora died trying to save those girls. She died believing in something worth dying for. I owe her memory more than just walking away. You loved her. More than I knew how to say while she was alive. The admission came out rough. She pulled me back from a dark place, made me remember what it felt like to be human, and I couldn't save her. I didn't even know she needed saving. You didn't know because she protected you. If she'd told you what she was doing, you'd have tried to stop her or helped her, and either way Crow might have killed you both. Mara's voice was gentle. Leora knew what she was risking. She made her choice. And died for it. Yes, but not for nothing. Not if we finish this. The wind picked up outside, howling through the canyon with a sound like voices. Cale moved to the window, looking out at darkness broken only by stars. Somewhere out there, in a town called Blackridge, a man named Darius Crow was running an operation built on suffering, protected, successful, untouchable. Cale had walked away from violence years ago, had buried his military skills, his tactical training, everything that had made him an effective weapon. He'd come to this desert to find peace, to let the land wash away the blood and the nightmares. But some things couldn't be walked away from. Some things followed you. He turned back to Mara. 3 days. You rest, heal as much as you can. I'll scout the area, make sure we weren't followed. Then we go to the hives, find Leora's evidence. After that, he paused. After that, we burn Crow's world down. Mara's good eye filled with tears, but she was smiling. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get worse before it gets better, if it gets better. I know, but at least I won't face it alone. Cale nodded once, then moved to bank the fire in the stove. Night had fully settled, bringing the cold that desert nights always carried. He pulled a spare blanket from his supplies and settled into his chair, positioned where he could watch both the door and the woman who carried a dead woman's face. Sleep would be difficult, but he'd spent years mastering the art of staying alert on minimal rest. Old training died hard. Outside, the desert wind carried secrets and whispered promises of violence to come. Cale Varen listened to those whispers and began preparing for war. Dawn came slowly to the box canyon, light creeping down the red rock walls like honey. Cale had been awake for hours, moving through routines that had become meditation, checking supplies, cleaning weapons, planning. Mara woke to the smell of coffee and something cooking. She managed to sit up this time, though the movement brought a grimace of pain. Easy, Cale said, bringing her a cup. Black, because I don't have anything else. Black is perfect. She sipped carefully. What are you making? Eggs and beans. You need protein. They ate in companionable silence. Mara's appetite surprised them both, a good sign that her body was focusing on healing instead of just surviving. When they'd finished, Cale cleared the plates and turned to face her. I have questions, he said. Ask. Crow's operation. How big is it? How many people does he have working for him? Mara considered. From what Leora told me, he runs the charity house with a staff of 4. 2 women who act as house mothers, a man who handles maintenance and security, and Crow himself as director. But the trafficking network extends beyond that. He has buyers, transporters, people who facilitate the disappearances. Leora estimated at least a dozen people directly involved. And the protection? Law enforcement? She was vague about that, probably to protect me if things went wrong. But she mentioned names: Sheriff Roland Vance in Blackridge, Deputy Marcus Chen, possibly others in county administration. That's local. What about state level? Lyora thought state law enforcement was clean. That's why she was planning to go to them. But getting evidence to them safely was the challenge. She couldn't risk it being intercepted or dismissed before the right people saw it. Cale paced the cabin, thinking through the tactical situation. If we assume the evidence is at the hives, and we successfully retrieve it, we need a plan to deliver it that doesn't expose you or get it buried. That means bypassing Blackridge entirely, going straight to state authorities with enough documentation that they can't ignore it. Agreed. But there's another problem. Even if we hand over evidence and it triggers an investigation, Crow will know someone survived to retrieve it. He'll come looking. You'll need protection, probably witness security. I'll deal with that when the time comes. Will you? Cale stopped pacing, fixing her with a hard look. Because from where I'm standing, you're operating on rage and guilt, not strategy. That'll get you killed. Mara's jaw tightened. Maybe, but at least I'll die doing something that matters instead of hiding in a canyon pretending the world doesn't exist. The words hit like a slap. Kyle felt his own anger rising, matching hers. Is that what you think I'm doing? Isn't it? You're out here alone, cut off from everything, nursing wounds that won't heal because you won't let them. Lyora told me about you in our last conversation. She said you were brilliant and broken, and that she loved you, but didn't know how to save you from yourself. Mara's voice softened. She would have wanted you to live, Kyle. Really live, not just survive. She doesn't get a vote anymore. She's dead. Because men like Crow exist and good people die trying to stop them. You can either accept that and hide, or you can fight back. Mara leaned forward despite the pain it caused. I'm fighting. With or without you. I'd rather have your help because I think you're exactly the kind of dangerous the situation needs. But I'm doing this either way. They stared at each other, two wounded people bound by a dead woman's memory and a living rage against injustice. Finally, Kyle nodded. 3 days, he repeated. Then we move. 3 days, Mara agreed. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away morning shadows. And in the canyon's hidden sanctuary, two people began planning a war against darkness. The 3 days passed like a held breath. Mara healed faster than Kyle expected, driven by a will that refused to acknowledge the body's limitations. By the second morning, she was walking the length of the cabin without support, though each step etched lines of pain across her face. By the third afternoon, she insisted on accompanying Kale outside to check his perimeter traps, moving through the canyon with grim determination. You push too hard, Kyle said, watching her navigate a rocky slope with visible effort. I push exactly as hard as necessary. Mara paused to catch her breath, one hand pressed against her ribs. Every hour I spend healing is an hour Crow thinks he's safe. That's dangerous. You dying from overexertion is also dangerous. She shot him a look that was pure Lyora, that mix of exasperation and affection that used to make Kyle's chest ache. On Mara's bruised face, it created a strange dissonance, a ghost wearing flesh. I'm not dying, she said. I'm getting stronger. There's a difference. That evening, as Kyle prepared their meal over the wood stove, Mara sat at his small table studying the maps he'd laid out. The route to the old orchard where Lyora had kept her hives was marked in pencil, along with alternate paths and potential observation points. You think like a soldier, Mara observed. I was a soldier, long time ago. Special forces? Kale's hand stilled over the pan. What makes you say that? The way you move, the way you assess threats. The fact that you live in a fortress disguised as a cabin in the middle of nowhere. She traced one of the alternate routes with her finger. Lyora mentioned you had military experience, but she never said what kind. Probably because I never told her the details. Kyle resumed cooking, not looking at Mara. Some things are better left buried. Even things that might help us now? Especially those. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the sizzle of food and the wind outside. Finally, Mara spoke again, her voice softer. She loved you very much, you know. In our last phone call, she talked about you for almost an hour. Said she'd never met anyone who understood silence the way you did. That most people are afraid of quiet, but you lived in it like it was home. Kael's throat tightened. She talked too much. She talked exactly enough. Just like I push exactly hard enough. Mara smiled slightly. We're not so different, you and I. We both know how to survive things that should have killed us. We both carry ghosts, and we both love the same woman in our own ways. You barely knew her as an adult. True, but she was still my sister, my twin. Even with all the years and distance between us, I felt it when she died, like something inside me had been severed. Mara's good eye, the swelling around the other, had finally receded enough to partially open, fixed on Kael with uncomfortable intensity. I imagine you felt the same thing. He had. The day of Leora's accident, Kael had been tracking elk in the high country, miles from any road or signal. But he'd known. Something fundamental had shifted in the world, a wrongness he couldn't name. He'd abandoned the hunt and hiked 20 miles back to his truck, driven through the night to Prescott, and arrived to find police at Leora's apartment with news that shattered what remained of his carefully reconstructed life. I felt it, he admitted quietly. Then you understand why I can't walk away. Why I won't. Mara leaned back in her chair, wincing slightly. She's gone. But what she died trying to stop is still happening. Those girls are still disappearing. Crow is still profiting from their suffering. And if we do nothing, her death meant nothing. Her death meant something regardless. She lived trying to protect people. That has value. Not enough value. Not if the evil continues. Mara's voice hardened. I need her death to count for more than good intentions. I need it to be the thing that finally brought Crow down. Otherwise, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I failed her twice. Once, by not being there when she needed me, and again by not finishing what she started. Kael served the food in silence, his mind working through implications and possibilities. Mara's determination was admirable, but determination without strategy was just another word for suicide. If they were going to do this, and some part of him had already committed, though he hadn't fully acknowledged it yet, they needed more than righteous anger. They ate quickly, efficiently. Afterward, Kyle spread additional maps across the table, these showing Black Ridge and the surrounding area in detail. Tell me everything you learned about Crow's operation before they grabbed you, he said. Mara's expression sharpened, falling into a more analytical mode. The charity house is on the north edge of town, a converted Victorian that looks like something from a postcard. Big yard, white picket fence, the whole performance. Crow lives on the property in a separate cottage. The main house has space for up to 12 girls at a time. How many are there now? I counted 7 before I was taken. Ages ranging from maybe 13 to 17. Pain crossed Mara's face, but not from physical injury. They looked healthy, well cared for. That's part of how he maintains cover. The girls who stay, the ones who don't disappear. They're genuine cases. Real troubled kids getting real help. It makes everyone think the program works. Camouflage. Exactly. For every girl he traffics, he successfully helps 2 or 3 others. The numbers work out to look legitimate. And the ones who disappear, they're already kids with troubled backgrounds, histories of running away, no strong family connections. When they vanish, it doesn't raise immediate red flags. Kyle studied the map, noting sight lines and access points around the property. Security. There's a fence around the entire compound, ostensibly for the girls' safety. Cameras at the gate and main entrances. Thomas Wade, he's the maintenance and security guy, lives in an apartment above the garage. He's former military, always armed, always watching. That's the one who supervised your interrogation? No, that was someone else. 3 men I'd never seen before. Professional muscle, not local talent. Mara's jaw tightened. Wade was there when they grabbed me from my hotel, but he wasn't at the warehouse. I think Crow keeps his operational people separate from his public people. Smart. Compartmentalization protects the main operation if part of it gets compromised. Kael made notes on the map. What about Crow himself? You ever see him? Once from a distance. I was watching the house, trying to figure out a way to get inside and search for evidence. He came out to meet with someone, a woman in an expensive car. They talked for maybe 10 minutes, very cordial, very professional. Then she left and he went back inside. Description? Crow, late 50s, well-dressed, average height and build, the kind of man who looks like every respected community leader you've ever seen, completely unremarkable, which I imagine is part of his appeal. He doesn't look like a monster. Monsters rarely do. Kyle circled several locations on the map. These are the places you searched for Leora's evidence? Mara nodded. Her old apartment. It's been rented to someone else, but I talked my way in for a look. Her workplace, though most of her files were cleared out after her death. The cemetery where our mother is buried. A storage unit she rented, but it only had furniture and boxes of old books. She traced her own path across the map with one finger. I was working my way through every location I could think of when they grabbed me. How did they know to watch for you? I don't know for certain, but I wasn't exactly subtle. I asked questions, showed people Leora's photo, mentioned her name. If Crow has people watching for anyone inquiring about her, I basically announced myself. Cale shook his head. You're lucky they didn't kill you immediately. They wanted information first. Wanted to know what I'd found, who I'd told, whether Leora had shared anything with me before she died. Mara's hand unconsciously went to her ribs, touching the place where the worst of the beating had been concentrated. I think they were genuinely worried that evidence might surface, which means Crow knows, or at least suspects, that Leora documented his operation before she died. That gives us leverage. How? Because if he's worried about evidence, he's vulnerable. Vulnerable people make mistakes. Cale leaned back, thinking through angles. The question is how we exploit that vulnerability without getting killed in the process. Mara was quiet for a long moment, studying Kyle's face in the lamplight. You've done this before. Planned operations, I mean. Gone after targets. Different context, different rules, but the same principles. Cale hesitated, then nodded slowly. Similar enough. Identify the objective, assess the opposition, plan for contingencies, execute with overwhelming force at the point of decision. What's our objective? Survival first, everything else second. No. Mara's voice was firm. The objective is stopping Crow, exposing his operation, freeing those girls, making sure he can never hurt anyone else. Survival is just a tactic that supports the objective. Survival is what keeps you alive to achieve objectives. And dying is what happens when you prioritize safety over mission. She met his gaze without flinching. I'm not saying we should be reckless. I'm saying we need to be willing to take risks that matter. Otherwise, we're just hiding with extra steps. The accusation stung because it was partially true. Kyle had spent 5 years hiding in this canyon, telling himself it was healing when really it was just strategic withdrawal from a world that had taken too much. Leora had drawn him partway back, but her death had sent him retreating deeper than before. Tomorrow, he said finally, we go to the hives. We find Leora's evidence. Then we decide our next move based on what we have to work with. Agreed. They spent the next hour reviewing details, timing, routes, contingency plans if they encountered problems. Kyle's military training surfaced naturally, structuring their planning with tactical precision. Mara absorbed it all, asking sharp questions, identifying potential gaps. By the time they finished, full night had settled over the canyon. Kyle banked the fire while Mara prepared for sleep, her movements still careful, but increasingly confident. Kyle? She said as he settled into his chair for another night of light rest. Yeah? Thank you. For believing me. For helping. She paused. Leora was right about you. What did she say? That you were the kind of man who would walk through fire for someone you loved, that your loyalty was absolute, even when it hurt. Mara pulled the blanket up to her chin. I think she'd be glad you're helping me finish what she started. Kyle didn't trust himself to respond. He simply nodded and turned away, staring into the darkness beyond the window. Somewhere in that darkness, a dead woman's secrets waited to be uncovered. And beyond that, a reckoning was coming. He just had to make sure they survived long enough to deliver it. Dawn came with unusual clarity, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. Kyle had the truck loaded and ready before Mara woke. Supplies, weapons, medical kit, everything they might need if things went wrong. The old Ford pickup was battered and unreliable looking, perfect camouflage for blending into rural Arizona. Mara emerged from the cabin moving with surprising steadiness, dressed in clothes Kyle had scrounged from his limited supplies. The jeans were too long, the shirt too large, but she'd made them work. "How do I look?" she asked, like someone who survived getting beaten to death. "So, not ready for undercover work?" "Not even close." Kyle handed her a baseball cap and sunglasses. "But these will help. We're not going anywhere crowded, so it shouldn't matter." They drove out of the canyon as the sun climbed, following dirt roads that barely deserved the name. Kale knew every turn, every washout, every place where the path disappeared entirely, and you had to navigate by landmark. It was one reason he'd chosen this location. Accessibility was optional, which meant unwanted visitors were rare. The drive to the orchard took 90 minutes, much of it on paved highway where Kyle kept to the speed limit and watched his mirrors. No one followed. No one paid them any attention. They were just another dusty truck in a state full of dusty trucks. The old orchard sat 5 miles outside Prescott, down a private lane marked with a faded sign reading, "Hendricks Family Farm, no trespassing." Cale pulled off the main road and stopped. "Problem?" Mara asked. "Maybe. Sarah Hendricks was in her 70s when Leora was alive. 5 years later, she might not be here anymore. Or she might have sold the property, or we're overthinking this." Mara pointed to a thin column of smoke rising from beyond a stand of cottonwood trees. "Someone's home. Let's find out who." Kyle drove slowly up the lane, giving anyone watching plenty of time to see them coming. The farmhouse appeared around a bend, a low adobe structure with a wide porch and bright blue shutters. An elderly woman sat in a rocking chair, a shotgun across her lap. "That's Sarah," Kyle said quietly. "She doesn't look happy to see us." She never looked happy to see anyone. But there was relief in Kyle's voice. Sarah Hendricks had been one of the few people Leora had truly trusted, a surrogate grandmother who'd provided land for the bees and wisdom for the beekeeper. Cale parked well away from the house and got out slowly, hands visible. Mara followed his lead. "Mrs. Hendricks?" Cale called out. "It's Cale Varon. I don't know if you remember me." The old woman's eyes narrowed, studying him across the distance. Then her expression shifted to something complicated. Surprise, sadness, maybe a touch of anger. "Remember you?" Her voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "Hard to forget the man who disappeared after Leora died. She loved you, you know. And you couldn't even stay for the memorial service." The words hit like bullets. Kyle had no defense, no justification that would sound like anything but excuse. "No, ma'am," he said simply. "I couldn't." Sarah's gaze shifted to Mara, and her weathered face went pale. "Lord have mercy, who is that?" "My name is Mara Hale," Mara said, stepping forward. "I'm Leora's twin sister." "Her twin?" Sarah set the shotgun aside and stood, moving with the careful deliberation of age. "She mentioned you, said you two had been apart but were finding your way back to each other." She came down the porch steps, approaching Mara with wonder. "The resemblance it's like seeing a ghost." "I get that a lot lately." Mara's smile was sad. "Mrs. Hendricks, we need your help." "With what?" "With finishing what Leora started." The old woman looked between them, reading volumes in their expressions and body language. "Come inside, we'll talk over coffee." Sarah's kitchen was exactly as Kale remembered, bright, cluttered with the accumulated treasures of a long life, smelling of herbs and wood smoke. She poured coffee with steady hands and settled them at a scarred wooden table that had probably seen 3 generations of family meals. "Start talking," she said. Mara did, laying out the story with brutal efficiency. Crow's operation, Leora's investigation, the murder disguised as an accident, the trafficking network that continued to operate 5 years later. She didn't spare details about her own capture and torture, the dump site in the desert, Kyle's rescue. Sarah listened without interruption, her face growing harder with each revelation. When Mara finished, The old woman sat silent for a long moment. I knew something was wrong, she said finally. Leora came to see me 2 weeks before she died. She was scared, more scared than I'd ever seen her, said she'd uncovered something terrible and needed a safe place to keep documentation until she could get it to the right people. Cale leaned forward. The hives. She hid evidence in the hives? Near them. There's a root cellar out past the orchard, old as the property itself. Leora asked if she could use it, said she needed somewhere no one would think to look. I gave her a key and didn't ask questions. Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. When she died, I thought about telling someone. But who? She'd said local law enforcement couldn't be trusted. And I'm just an old woman with bees and a vegetable garden. What was I going to do? You kept her secret, Mara said gently. That took courage. Or cowardice. I'm still not sure which. Sarah stood abruptly. The root cellar is still there. I check on it sometimes, make sure it stays dry and secure. Whatever Leora left, it's waiting. They followed her outside, past the farmhouse to where the orchard spread out in neat rows. The trees were old, gnarled things that still produced fruit each season, and among them the beehives stood like small white temples humming with life. Cale stopped, staring at the hives. Leora had loved this place. She'd spent hours here, tending the bees with a gentle competence that had amazed him. Once she'd coaxed him into helping with a harvest, suiting him up in protective gear and walking him through the process. He'd been stung 3 times despite the precautions, and she'd laughed, saying the bees were testing him. They like you, she'd said, removing the stinger from his forearm with practiced ease. Otherwise, they'd have stung more. This is them liking me? This is them saying you're worth knowing. There's a difference. The memory was so vivid it hurt. Cale forced it down, following Sarah past the hives to where the land sloped gently toward a dry creek bed. The root cellar was built into the slope, its door nearly invisible behind overgrown brush. Sarah produced a key from her pocket and unlocked the heavy padlock securing the door. I haven't been inside in months. Watch for spiders. The cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and time. Sarah clicked on a battery-powered lantern, revealing shelves stacked with preserves and emergency supplies. At the far end, beneath a tarp, sat a weatherproof case the size of a small trunk. Mara moved toward it like a woman approaching an altar. Her hand shook as she pulled away the tarp and flipped open the case's latches. Inside, organized with meticulous care, was Leora's evidence. Ledgers bound in leather, each page covered in neat handwriting. Photographs in protective sleeves, showing Crow with various individuals. Some of the faces made Cale's blood run cold, recognizing known criminals from news reports. Financial documents, bank statements, wire transfers. A thumb drive labeled audio recordings in Leora's precise script. And a letter, sealed in an envelope, addressed, "To whoever finds this." Mara picked up the letter with trembling hands. "May I?" Sarah nodded. The envelope opened with a soft tear. Inside was a single page, and Mara read aloud. "If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. That sounds dramatic, but I'm not the dramatic type, so you can trust it's an honest assessment. My name is Leora Hale, and I'm a social worker in Prescott, Arizona. For the past 2 years, I've been documenting a human trafficking operation run by Darius Crow, operating under the cover of a charity house in Black Ridge. This case contains everything you'll need to shut him down: names, dates, financial proof, and testimony from survivors I've interviewed. I've tried to go through proper channels. I've been blocked, dismissed, and threatened. The corruption protecting Crow runs deeper than I initially understood. If you found this, it means I failed to expose him before he silenced me. Please don't let my failure be the end of this fight. Those girls deserve justice. They deserve to be saved. To my sister Mara, if you're the one reading this, I'm sorry. Sorry we lost so many years. Sorry I couldn't be there to rebuild what our family broke. I love you. I've always loved you. Finish this for me. And know that even though I'm scared, even though I might not survive what's coming, I'm not sorry I tried. Some things are worth dying for. The evidence speaks for itself. Trust it. Use it. Make sure Crow never hurts another child. With hope for justice and love for those I'm leaving behind, Leora Hale. Silence filled the cellar when Mara finished reading. She She pressed the letter to her chest, eyes closed, tears streaming down her bruised face. Kyle placed a hand on her shoulder, the only comfort he knew how to offer. Sarah wiped at her own eyes with a handkerchief pulled from her pocket. "She knew," Mara whispered. "She knew they'd kill her, and she did it anyway." "Because it mattered more than her fear," Sarah said softly. "That's who Leora was. Brave when it counted." Cale was already examining the contents of the case, his mind shifting into operational mode. The documentation was extensive, damning, meticulously organized. Ledgers showed 23 girls trafficked over a 4-year period, with names, dates, and dollar amounts that made his stomach turn. The photographs connected Crow to a network of buyers and facilitators across 3 states. The financial records proved money laundering through multiple shell corporations. And the thumb drive. He'd need a computer to access it. But if it contained audio recordings of transactions or confessions, that would be the final nail in Crow's coffin. "This is it," he said. "This is everything we need." "So what do we do with it?" Mara had composed herself, wiping away tears and squaring her shoulders. "We can't just mail it to the state attorney general. It could get intercepted, lost, dismissed as fabrication. We need to deliver it in person. With you as a witness who can authenticate it, explain Leora's investigation, testify about what Crow's people did to you." Cale closed the case carefully. "But that means keeping you alive long enough to testify." "There's something else," Sarah interjected. "Something you need to know before you leave here." They both turned to her. The old woman's face was grave. 3 days ago, a man came to my door asking questions about Leora. Said he was writing a book about unsolved cases, wanted to know about her work, her friends, any places she frequented. I didn't tell him anything, but he was looking for this. Cale felt ice forming in his gut. Description? 30s, fit, professional. He had an intensity about him that made me nervous. When I said I couldn't help him, he thanked me and left. But I saw him later, parked on the road with binoculars, watching the property. Crow's people, Mara's voice was tight. They're still searching for the evidence, which means they know I didn't find it before they grabbed me, and they're covering bases. Cale's mind raced through implications. If Crow had people watching locations connected to Leora, they might still be under surveillance. Coming here had been a calculated risk, but now they needed to assume they'd been spotted. "Mrs. Hendricks, is there another way off this property besides the main lane?" "There's an old service road that runs along the back fence. Hasn't been maintained in years, but a truck could make it if you're careful." "Show me on a map." 5 minutes later, they had a route planned. Sarah would stay at the farmhouse, maintain normal routines, give them time to get clear before anyone realized they'd been there. The evidence case fit in the truck's hidden compartment beneath the bed, a modification Kyle had made years ago for reasons he'd never fully examined. As they prepared to leave, Sarah pulled Mara into an embrace. "She would be proud of you, both of you. Finish this right." "We will," Mara promised. They took the service road, moving slowly over rough terrain, the truck's suspension groaning. Kyle kept one eye on the mirrors, watching for pursuit. Nothing yet, but that could change fast. "What's our next move?" Mara asked. "We need to get this evidence to someone who can act on it immediately. No delays, no chain of custody issues that could compromise its validity." Cale's hands were tight on the wheel. "I know someone. Former JAG officer, now works in the state attorney general's office. If we can get to her, she'll know what to do with this. Can we trust her? She court-martialed me 15 years ago for disobeying a direct order that would have gotten my entire team killed. Instead of prison, she advocated for medical discharge with honors, said I'd served enough and deserved a chance at civilian life." Kyle smiled grimly. "Yeah, we can trust her. Where is she?" "Phoenix. 3-hour drive if we push it." "Then let's push it." But as they emerged from the service road onto a rural highway, Kyle spotted movement in his rear-view mirror, a dark SUV hanging back but matching their speed. "We've got company," he said quietly. Mara turned to look, then faced forward again, her jaw set. "How do you want to play this?" "Depends on whether they want to follow or engage. If they follow, we lead them somewhere we control. If they engage..." He checked the Colt at his hip, then the rifle locked in the rack behind the seat. "We handle it." The SUV maintained distance for 3 miles, then suddenly accelerated. "Engaging," Cale said, and pressed down on the gas. The chase was on. The old Ford had more power than it looked like it should. Cale had rebuilt the engine himself 2 years back, understanding that in his line of solitary living, reliable transportation could mean the difference between survival and becoming another desert statistic. Now that foresight paid dividends as he pushed the truck hard down the 2-lane highway, the SUV growing larger in his mirrors. "How many?" he asked, eyes locked on the road ahead. Mara had twisted in her seat, watching through the rear window. "2 in front. Can't see the back. Could be more. Assume more." Cale's mind cycled through options. They were on open highway with minimal cover, scattered ranches on either side offering no real concealment. The SUV was newer, faster, and probably armored. A straight chase would end badly. The SUV surged closer, now just 50 yards back. "They're not trying to run us off the road," Mara observed. "They're hurting us." She was right. The SUV could have forced a collision by now, but instead maintained position, pushing them forward, which meant there was something ahead they wanted Cale to drive into. A roadblock, backup units, somewhere the odds shifted decisively in their favor. Cale slammed the brakes. The truck skidded, tires screaming, momentum fighting physics. The SUV shot past them, its driver caught off guard by the sudden reversal. Cale cranked the wheel, executing a bootlegger's turn that spun them 180 degrees. For a moment, the truck tilted on 2 wheels, Mara grabbing the door handle with white knuckles. Then all 4 tires hit pavement, and they were racing back the way they'd come. "That was insane," Mara breathed. "That was necessary. Hold on." The SUV had already recovered, executing its own turn with professional precision. Now the chase reversed, with Cale in the lead and his pursuers closing fast. He took the first turnoff he saw, a dirt road heading east into broken country where rock formations rose like ancient sentinels. The truck handled rough terrain better than the SUV's street tires would. Cale used that advantage, pushing into arroyos and across washboard sections that rattled teeth and tested suspension. The SUV fell back, struggling with the conditions, but didn't abandon pursuit. "They're persistent," Mara said. "Professional, which means Crow spent money on these people." Cale spotted a narrow canyon mouth ahead, barely wide enough for the truck. "I'm going to try something. If this doesn't work, you grab the evidence case and run. Don't look back, don't wait for me. Get to Phoenix and find Colonel Rachel Martinez at the Attorney General's office. I'm not leaving you. You will if I'm dead. Otherwise, Leora died for nothing." He didn't give her time to argue, gunning the engine toward the canyon. The walls closed in on both sides, red rock scraping paint from the truck's panels. The path barely qualified as passable, twisting between boulders and ancient stone. Behind them, the SUV hesitated at the entrance, then committed to the passage. Exactly what Cale had hoped. He'd explored this area years ago, mapping routes for reasons that had seemed paranoid at the time but proved prescient now. This particular canyon had a feature that made it tactically valuable. It narrowed to the point where only one vehicle could pass, then opened into a small box canyon with no exit. A trap, if you were being pursued, or an ambush point, if you knew what you were doing. Cale pushed into the box canyon and immediately stopped, throwing the truck into park. "Out! Now!" They bailed from the vehicle, Cale grabbing the rifle from behind the seat, while Mara pulled the evidence case from its hidden compartment. He pointed to a cluster of boulders on the canyon's north wall. "Get behind those. Stay down. No matter what happens, you stay down." "What are you going to do?" "Negotiate?" From a position of strength. He chambered a round in the rifle, the metallic sound sharp in the confined space. "Go!" Mara ran, moving well despite her healing injuries, and disappeared behind the rocks. Cale positioned himself behind the truck's engine block, using it as cover while maintaining clear sight lines to the canyon entrance. The SUV appeared moments later, pushing through the narrow passage with its paint job suffering the same fate as the truck's. It emerged into the box canyon and stopped, engine idling. For a long moment, nothing happened. Both vehicles sat in the dust and silence, separated by 30 yards and a calculation of risk. Then the SUV's doors opened. Three men emerged, and Kael's assessment of professional solidified into certainty. They moved with military precision, covering angles, weapons held with familiar competence. The leader was the man Mara had described from her interrogation. Early 40s, scarred face, dead eyes that had seen too much violence and found comfort in it. Kael Varen, the man called out. His voice carried a faint accent, maybe South African or Rhodesian. That's your name, right? The hermit who lives in the canyon? Kael said nothing, rifle steady. We're not here for you, mate. We're here for the woman and whatever she took from the Hendricks farm. Give us both, and you walk away. Simple transaction. Nothing about this is simple, Kael replied. It can be, or it can get complicated. The scarred man gestured casually to his companions. Three of us. One of you. The woman's injured, not a factor. Math says you lose. Math doesn't account for motivation. I've got plenty. How's yours? A slight smile crossed the scarred face. Fair point. I'm getting paid either way. How about this? We're all professionals here. Let's be professional about it. Tell me what it would take for you to hand over the woman in the case. There isn't a number high enough. Everyone has a number. Not for this. Kael adjusted his aim fractionally. The case contains evidence of human trafficking, children being sold like cattle. The woman is a witness to murder. You want me to believe you're just following orders, fine. But following orders to protect child traffickers makes you complicit in every crime they committed. Something flickered in the scarred man's expression. Not quite conscience, but maybe acknowledgement. You think I don't know what Crow does? You think that matters to me? I think it should. Should doesn't pay my mortgage, Varen. Should doesn't put food on the table or send my kids to good schools. The world's full of evil men doing evil things. I can either stand against them and accomplish nothing except getting myself killed, or I can accept that I'm not the hero and focus on survival. That's a coward's logic. The scarred man's jaw tightened. Call it what you want. The job's the job. Last chance. Hand them over. No. Right then. The scarred man raised his hand, ready to signal his team. Kael fired. The shot wasn't aimed at the man, but at the SUV's front tire, which exploded with a bang that echoed off the canyon walls. Before the scarred man could react, Kael chambered another round and took out the back tire on the same side. Your vehicle is disabled, Kael called out. You're 15 miles from the nearest road, in country that hits 115 degrees by midday. You've got maybe 6 hours of water between the three of you, and I know every inch of this terrain while you're stumbling blind. The three men had taken cover behind their crippled vehicle, weapons trained on Kael's position. The scarred man's voice came tight with controlled anger. You just made this complicated. I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Take it. We walk away, Crow will kill us for failing. That's between you and your employer, not my problem. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, the scarred man laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You know what? You're right. It's not your problem. He raised his voice to his companions. Stand down. We're leaving. Boss? One of them questioned. I said stand down. This isn't worth dying in a canyon for. The scarred man stood slowly, hands visible. We'll tell Crow we lost you in the terrain. Buy yourselves a head start while we figure out how to explain this. Kael didn't lower the rifle. Why the sudden conscience? Not conscience, just tired of following men like Crow to places like this. The scarred man started backing toward the canyon entrance, his team covering the retreat. The woman, Mara, right? Tell her I'm the one who couldn't pull the trigger in that desert. Tell her we're even now. Understanding hit Kael like a physical blow. This was the young one Mara had mentioned, the man who'd shown mercy when ordered to execute her. Not so young up close, but young enough to still have pieces of humanity Crow hadn't completely corrupted. What's your name? Kael asked. Doesn't matter. I won't be around long enough for it to matter. The scarred man was at the canyon entrance now. Give them hell, Varen. Someone should. Then they were gone, disappearing into the narrow passage. Kael maintained his position for 5 full minutes, listening for sounds of deception or return. Nothing came except wind and the settling of disturbed dust. Mara emerged from her hiding spot, moving cautiously. Did that just happen? Apparently. Kael lowered the rifle, suddenly feeling the adrenaline drain and fatigue rush in to replace it. We need to move. He bought us time, but Crow will know within hours that we have the evidence. Then what? Then he'll mobilize everything he has to stop us from using it. Cale headed for the truck, Mara following. Phoenix is out, too far, too exposed. We need somewhere closer, somewhere we can fortify and wait for help to arrive. Like where? Cale thought fast, cycling through locations and options. They needed somewhere defensible, with communication access, close enough to reach quickly, but isolated enough that Crow's people couldn't simply overwhelm them with numbers. An idea formed, dangerous and desperate. Black Ridge, he said. Mara stared at him. You want to go into Crow's territory? Are you insane? Think about it. Crow's power base is there, yes. But it's also the last place he'll expect us to go. And there's something else. Cale pulled out his phone, checking for signal. Weak, but present. You said Leora documented everything in that case. Names, dates, locations. That means she has evidence about the girls currently in Crow's facility. So? So we know a new shipment is coming. You said you overheard them talking about it during your interrogation. Girls arriving within days. If we can find out when and where, we can intercept them, save them before they disappear into Crow's network, and get ourselves killed in the process. Maybe, probably. Cale met her eyes. But if we just hand the evidence to authorities and hope for the best, those girls in the current shipment might be gone before anyone can act. Crow will disappear them the moment he knows we've blown his operation. We have a chance to stop that right now if we're willing to take the risk. Mara was silent, clearly torn between survival instinct and the mission that had brought her here. Finally, she nodded. Leora would do it. She'd risk everything to save them. Her voice strengthened. We go to Black Ridge, we find those girls, and we finish this. They drove out of the canyon using a different route, one that looped north before cutting back toward the highway. Cale kept checking mirrors and sight lines, but the scarred man had apparently kept his word. No pursuit materialized. As they reached paved road and turned toward Black Ridge, Cale made a series of phone calls. The first was to Colonel Rachel Martinez, left on her voicemail, with enough detail to ensure she'd take it seriously. Location, nature of the evidence, request for immediate assistance. The second call was to an old military contact who owed him favors, arranging for backup that might arrive in time to matter. The third call he didn't make but wanted to, Sarah Hendricks, warning her that Crow's people might return. But calling her would only confirm her involvement. Better to let her maintain plausible deniability. Mara spent the drive reviewing the contents of the evidence case, her face growing grimmer with each page. When she reached the audio recording, she plugged the thumb drive into Cale's laptop, another piece of equipment that had seemed like paranoid over-preparation until this moment. The first recording made her gasp. Leora's voice, clear and steady, interviewing a 16-year-old girl who'd escaped from Crow's network. The details were horrific, auction-style sales, buyers who ranged from wealthy businessmen to criminal organizations, destinations across 3 continents. How did she get this girl to talk? Mara wondered aloud. By being someone worth trusting, Cale said quietly. Leora had that quality. People told her things they wouldn't tell anyone else. There were 7 recordings total, each one a testimony that would devastate Crow's operation in court. Combined with the financial records and photographs, it was enough to trigger a federal investigation that would reach far beyond Black Ridge, but only if they lived long enough to deliver it. Black Ridge appeared on the horizon as afternoon sun slanted toward evening, a small town that looked like a postcard of American heartland values. Clean streets, well-maintained buildings, a church steeple rising above tree-lined neighborhoods. The kind of place where nothing bad ever happened, or at least where bad things wore respectable masks. Cale drove past the charity house without slowing, but both of them looked. The Victorian structure was exactly as Mara had described. Beautiful, welcoming, completely innocent in appearance. Children's toys dotted the lawn. Flower beds bloomed with late-season color. A woman sat on the porch reading, the picture of pastoral peace. How many girls are inside right now? Cale asked. 7, last I counted, but if the new shipment arrives, Mara's voice trailed off. Then we're talking about potentially a dozen or more victims, too many to extract quietly. Cale turned down a side street, heading for the town's modest commercial district. We need information. When the shipment arrives, where they're being held before transfer, How many guards Crow has on site. How do we get that information without tipping our hand? Kyle pulled into the parking lot of a small diner, positioned where they could watch the street without being obvious about it. We wait and we watch. Crow's people will be moving, preparing for the shipment. We follow the preparation. It'll lead us to the timing and location. That could take days. We might not have days. Then we'll compress the timeline. KL pulled out the evidence case and extracted specific pages from the ledger, the most recent entries showing patterns and timing. Leora documented the last 3 shipments. They all happened on Fridays, late evening, at a warehouse on the industrial edge of town. If Crow sticks to pattern, that gives us until this Friday. Mara checked her phone calendar. That's tomorrow. Then we have less than 30 hours to prepare. Kyle started photographing pages from the evidence, uploading them to secure cloud storage that Colonel Martinez could access. Insurance, in case the worst happened and they didn't survive to deliver the physical evidence. As he worked, a sheriff's patrol car rolled slowly past the diner. The deputy inside, a young man with a crew cut and reflective sunglasses, scanned the parking lot with professional thoroughness. His gaze lingered on Kyle's truck before moving on. "We've been made," Mara said quietly. "Maybe. Or he's just doing his job." But Kyle's instincts said otherwise. Small town, unfamiliar vehicle, occupants who didn't fit the tourist profile. If local law enforcement was compromised, as Leora had suspected, they'd be watching for exactly this kind of anomaly. The patrol car turned the corner and disappeared. Kyle made a decision. "We need to split up. 2 targets are harder to track than 1. He handed Mara a burner phone he'd picked up months ago and never used. "I'm going to scout the warehouse, confirm it's the location, and see what security looks like. You find somewhere public to wait, library, coffee shop, somewhere with witnesses and cameras that make you a hard target. And if they find me anyway, then you run. Don't fight, don't try to be a hero, just survive long enough for help to arrive." Kyle pulled out cash from his emergency fund, handed her half. "If we get separated, if something happens to me, you take that evidence and you finish this mission. Understood?" Kyle, "Understood?" Mara's jaw set, but she nodded. "Understood. But you better come back because I'm not doing this alone." "I'll come back." He surprised himself by meaning it. Somewhere over the past days, this had stopped being about Leor's memory and started being about the woman sitting beside him, about the girls trapped in Crow's system, about standing against darkness because standing was all that separated civilization from chaos. They split at the town library, Mara disappearing inside with the evidence case concealed in a backpack Kyle had scrounged from his supplies. He watched until she was safely through the doors, then drove toward the industrial district marked on his map. The warehouse sat exactly where Leora's notes indicated. A squat concrete building with minimal windows, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. A single entrance faced the street, with a loading dock around back. 2 vehicles sat in the small parking lot, both generic white vans that screamed rental fleet. Kale drove past without slowing, circling the block to approach from different angles. Security cameras covered the obvious approach vectors. A guard shack sat empty, but looked recently used. The entire setup spoke of temporary fortification, a location activated for specific purposes, then left dormant between uses. Perfect for trafficking operations that needed to stay mobile and invisible. He parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, moving through the gaps between buildings with the practiced silence of old training. The fence was serious but not insurmountable. The cameras were standard commercial grade, easily avoided by someone who knew sightline geometry. Within 20 minutes, Kyle had circled the entire facility and confirmed what he'd suspected. The warehouse was being prepared for intake. Pallets of bottled water and basic supplies stacked inside, visible through a gap in the loading dock door. Cots set up in rows, at least 20 of them. Medical supplies, the kind you'd need for people who'd been transported in cramped, unsanitary conditions. And armed guards, 3 of them visible, with likely more inside. Professional security, not local muscle. Crow was treating this shipment as important enough to warrant serious protection. Kyle was photographing the setup through a telephoto lens when his phone buzzed. "Mara's number. Talk to me," he said quietly. "We have a problem. I'm looking at Crow's ledgers, cross-referencing with the audio recordings. One of the girls Leora interviewed mentioned a buyer, a specific name that appeared in financial records. I just saw that same name walk into the library. Ice flooded Kyle's veins. You're certain? Positive. He's with two other men, both armed. They're trying to look casual, but they're hunting. Mara's voice was steady, controlled. I think they're here for me. Can you leave without being seen? There's a back exit near the children's section. I can make it if I move now. Do it. I'm 10 minutes away. Cale was already moving, heading back to his truck at a run that ate up distance without looking panicked. Stay on the line. Tell me what you see. Moving now. There's a reading room between me and the exit. I'm cutting through. A pause. One of them spotted me. They're following. Run. Don't worry about being subtle. Just run. The phone picked up the sound of Mara's accelerating footsteps, her breathing quickening. Background noise of the library, startled voices, a chair scraping. Then the crash of a door being thrown open. I'm outside, Mara gasped. Behind the library, there's an alley. Head north. There's a residential area 2 blocks up, lots of houses with people home. Get there. Find someone. Call for help. They're right behind me. Cale was at his truck now, engine roaring to life. He knew Blackridge's layout from studying maps, knew the library's location. 2 minutes, maybe 3, if traffic was bad. But Mara didn't have 3 minutes. The phone transmitted sounds of pursuit, running feet, harsh breathing, a man's voice shouting for her to stop. Then a crash, Mara crying out in pain. Mara, Kyle shouted into the phone. Tripped. Ankle. Her voice was strained. They're coming. Fight. Whatever you have to do, fight. The sounds that came next were chaos. Mara screaming in defiance, a man's cursing, the impact of bodies colliding. Then a gunshot, shockingly loud through the phone's speaker. Mara? Mara! Nothing. The line stayed open, but all Kyle heard was wind and distant voices and the thunder of his own heartbeat. He broke every traffic law reaching the library, the truck screaming around corners. The back alley was empty when he arrived except for a dropped phone, Mara's burner, screen cracked, but still transmitting. And blood. Fresh blood splattered on the pavement. But no body. No Mara. No evidence case. Kyle's mind went cold and tactical. Emotions locked down behind walls built through years of military discipline. Assess. Analyze. Act. Blood patterns suggested a struggle, drag marks leading to the alley's far end, tire tracks from a vehicle that had left in a hurry. They'd taken her alive, which meant they wanted the evidence more than they wanted her dead, which meant Crow knew they had it, knew they were in Blackridge, was consolidating his position and preparing to eliminate the threat permanently. Cale's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered without speaking. Mr. Varon. The voice was cultured, educated, precisely the kind of respectable tone you'd expect from a community pillar. Darius Crow. I believe you have something that belongs to me, and I have someone who belongs to you. Shall we discuss an exchange? Every instinct screamed at Kyle to respond with violence, with threats, with anything except the calm calculation he forced into his voice. I'm listening. Good. That's very good. Here's how this works. You bring me Lyora's evidence, all of it, every copy you've made. In exchange, I return Mara Hale alive and relatively unharmed. Simple transaction. Where and when? The warehouse on Industrial Drive. You've already scouted it, so you know the location. Come alone, midnight tonight. Any sign of law enforcement, any indication you've shared the evidence with authorities, and Mara dies screaming. A pause. I've learned from my mistakes with Leora. I won't underestimate the threat you represent. How do I know Mara's alive? A moment of silence, then Mara's voice came through, shaking but defiant. Don't do it, Kyle. Don't give him anything. Let me... Her words cut off with a cry of pain. Crow's voice returned, unchanged in its cultured calm. As you can hear, she's quite alive. For now. Midnight, Mr. Varon. Don't be late. The line went dead. Kyle stood in the alley, phone still pressed to his ear, everything inside him screaming for action. Crow had Mara, had the evidence case. The entire mission balanced on a knife edge, and every option led through darkness. He could go to the warehouse with copies of the evidence, try to trade. Crow would kill them both anyway. He could go to local authorities, who were compromised and would either alert Crow or actively help him. He could wait for Colonel Martinez and the backup he'd requested, who might arrive too late to matter. Or he could do what Leora had apparently tried to do, what had gotten her killed, go directly at Crow with everything he had, trust in skills he'd spent years trying to forget, and burn the entire operation down regardless of the personal cost. Cale checked his watch. 7 hours until midnight. 7 hours to plan an assault on a fortified position held by professional security, extract a hostage, and somehow survive the attempt. The old Kyle Varen, the one who'd operated in dark corners of the world for his country, could have done it. Could have planned the operation, accounted for variables, executed with lethal precision. That Kyle had supposedly died years ago, buried under desert silence and deliberate isolation. But Leora's voice echoed in his memory, something she'd said during one of their long conversations about his past. The skills don't disappear. They're still there, waiting. The question is whether you'll ever need them badly enough to pick them up again. He needed them now. Kyle walked back to his truck, pulled out the rifle and the Colt 45, and began preparing for war. The warehouse wasn't the target. That realization crystallized in Kyle's mind as he sat in his truck 3 blocks away, studying satellite images on his laptop. Crow was too smart to concentrate everything in one location, too experienced to put all his leverage in a place Kyle had already scouted. The warehouse was a kill box, a trap baited with Mara's life, and designed to eliminate the threat while recovering the evidence. Which meant Mara wasn't there, and neither were the girls from the incoming shipment. Cale pulled up the ledgers he'd photographed, cross-referencing locations and patterns. Leora's documentation was meticulous, noting not just the warehouse, but secondary locations used for different phases of the operation. A safe house on the outskirts of town where girls were held before auction. A rural property 20 miles east used for longer-term storage. And the charity house itself, which served as both cover and occasional holding facility when timing required it. The charity house, where 7 girls currently resided, where Crow maintained his public face, where the entire operation centered, where he'd feel safest, most in control. That's where Mara would be. That's where the new shipment would arrive. And that's where KL needed to go, despite every tactical instinct screaming that assaulting a fortified position in the heart of town was suicide. He made 2 calls, the first to Colonel Martinez's office, leaving detailed coordinates and information about the charity house, the warehouse, and Crow's network. Insurance, again, in case he didn't survive the night. The second call was harder. He dialed a number he'd sworn never to use again, one that connected him to a past he'd tried to bury. Varen. The voice that answered was gravel and smoke, familiar despite the years. Didn't think I'd hear from you again. I need a favor, Sergeant. It's Master Sergeant now, and favors have a price. Name it. A pause, then a low whistle. Must be bad if you're not negotiating. What do you need? Kael laid it out in quick, precise terms. The situation, the targets, the timeline. When he finished, silence stretched across the connection. That's not a favor, the Master Sergeant said finally. That's a declaration of war. Yes. Against a trafficking network with professional security, local law enforcement protection, and enough money to make problems disappear. Yes. Using tactics we're not supposed to remember and skills we're not supposed to still have. Yes. Another pause. Then, I'll make some calls. Can't promise anyone will answer. And if they do, they're coming as private citizens with no official backing. You understand? I understand. 2 hours. That's the best I can do. If your people aren't extracted by then, you're on your own. 2 hours is enough. It had to be. Sergeant, thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're still breathing. The line went dead. Kael spent the next hour in preparation. That was part ritual, part practical necessity. He cleaned his weapons with methodical care, checking every mechanism, every round. The Colt 45 held 7 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. The rifle carried a full magazine of 30. Not enough for a prolonged engagement, but enough for surgical precision if he chose his shots carefully. He changed into dark clothing, practical and anonymous. Checked the fixed blade knife he carried, its edge honed to razor sharpness. loaded a small backpack with basic medical supplies, zip ties, a glass-breaking tool, and extra ammunition. Then he sat in silence, letting his mind settle into the cold clarity that had once been second nature. Emotion was the enemy of tactics. Rage would get him killed. Fear would paralyze him. He needed to be ice, calculating and precise, until the job was done. Leora's face appeared in his mind, not as he'd last seen her in death, but as she'd been in life, smiling, vital, whole. She'd believed in redemption, in the possibility that broken things could be made beautiful again. She'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. He couldn't save her, but he could finish what she'd started, and maybe that was its own kind of redemption. Darkness fell over Black Ridge with the suddenness of desert nightfall. Kyle moved through the town like a ghost, avoiding streetlights and security cameras, using the routes he'd mapped during his earlier reconnaissance. The charity house glowed with warm light, windows revealing ordinary scenes, staff members moving through rooms, the flicker of a television in the common area. The fence surrounding the property was decorative rather than defensive, meant to look welcoming while maintaining boundaries. Kyle went over it in a shadowed section, dropping silently into landscaped bushes. He held position, counting heartbeats, confirming no alarm had been triggered. Movement near the garage apartment. Thomas Wade, the security man, smoking a cigarette on his small balcony. The glow of the cigarette created a target marker in the darkness, and Kyle's hand went to his pistol before conscious thought. Old reflexes, old training. But killing Wade would alert everyone inside. Better to avoid, to ghost through the perimeter and find Mara without triggering active defense. Kale circled the main house, staying low, using garden features for cover. The ground floor windows showed the house mothers preparing for evening routines, medications distributed, bedtime approaching. Everything perfectly normal, perfectly innocent. Except in the basement. Light leaked from high windows at ground level, and through the glass Kyle caught movement that didn't fit the domestic pattern. Armed men, at least two of them, standing guard over something out of view. He pressed against the foundation, angling for a better sightline through the narrow window. The basement had been converted into something far different from typical charity house infrastructure. Steel doors, reinforced walls, the kind of security you'd see in a detention facility rather than a home for troubled girls. And behind one of those steel doors, barely visible through a gap, Kyle saw her. Mara, zip-tied to a chair, face bruised fresh on top of the fading damage from her desert beating. She was conscious, alert, staring at something beyond Kyle's sightline with defiant fury. He counted guards, 2 in the basement proper, visible through the window, likely more upstairs in the house. Wade in his apartment. Unknown additional security scattered through the property. Against all of them, Kyle had surprise, darkness, and skills rust-edged from disuse, but still sharp enough to cut. The question was how to extract Mara without getting her killed in the crossfire. His phone buzzed silently. Text message from an unknown number. In position. Awaiting signal. The master sergeant had come through. Somewhere in Black Ridge's darkness, former operators who'd served with Kyle were staging for intervention. Not many. The message suggested a small team, maybe 4 or 5 at most. But operators of that caliber were force multipliers, each one worth a dozen conventional security guards. Kyle typed a response. Target is basement of main house. Multiple hostiles. Extraction primary objective. Secondary objective, girls being held for trafficking. The reply came instantly. Understood. On your signal. Signal. Kyle needed to create chaos, pull security away from Mara long enough for extraction. The warehouse would work. Crow expected him there at midnight, which meant resources would be allocated to that location. If Kyle could make Crow believe the attack was coming at the warehouse, it would strip protection from the charity house. He checked his watch. 9:45. 2 hours and 15 minutes until the midnight meeting. Not enough time for elaborate misdirection, but enough for a feint if he moved fast. Kale withdrew from the charity house perimeter as silently as he'd entered, heading back to his truck. The drive to the warehouse took 8 minutes, and he approached with lights off, using the industrial district's darkness for cover. The facility was more heavily guarded than his earlier reconnaissance had shown. 6 men visible, probably more inside. They were positioned defensively, expecting trouble. Crow had committed serious resources to this location. Perfect. Kale circled to the facility's northeast corner where shadows were deepest and sightlines most limited. He pulled a road flare from his truck's emergency kit, weighing it in his hand. Simple, primitive, but effective for the purpose he needed. He lit the flare and threw it over the fence, aiming for a stack of wooden pallets near the loading dock. The flare arced through darkness and landed exactly where he'd intended, its bright chemical flame catching on dried wood and cardboard. Shouts erupted immediately. Guards converged on the fire, some grabbing extinguishers, others taking defensive positions expecting the flames to be cover for assault. Chaos bloomed in the warehouse compound, exactly as Kyle had planned. He was already moving, sprinting back to his truck. As he drove away, he sent a single word to the unknown number. Now. The response was immediate. Executing. Kyle pushed the truck hard toward the charity house, watching his mirrors for pursuit. None came. Crow's security was focused on the warehouse, convinced the threat was materializing there. By the time they realized it was a diversion, the extraction would be over, if everything went perfectly. Nothing ever went perfectly. Kyle parked 2 blocks from the charity house and approached on foot, moving fast now that stealth had become secondary to speed. The quiet neighborhood street was empty. Families settled in for the evening, unaware that violence was about to shatter their peaceful night. He spotted them as he approached, 4 figures in dark tactical gear, moving with the fluid precision of professionals. They'd taken position around the charity house's perimeter, covering angles and access points. One of them raised a hand in acknowledgement as Kyle approached. The man's face was painted black, but Kyle recognized him anyway. Riley Chen, who'd served 2 tours with him in places the military still wouldn't officially acknowledge. A sniper capable of impossible shots, and a friend who'd once carried Kale 3 miles through hostile territory after an ambush. "Good to see you, boss," Riley whispered. "Didn't think you'd come. Didn't think you'd ask." "Trafficking operation?" Riley's eyes were hard. "We're here. Let's burn it down." The other 3 operators materialized from darkness. Jackson, who could breach any door, Maria Santos, medic and close-quarters specialist, and bringing up the rear, the Master Sergeant himself, looking older but no less dangerous. "Basement extraction," Kyle said quietly, laying out the tactical situation. "Primary objective is the woman being held hostage. Secondary objective, if feasible, is the girls on the upper floors, but we do not engage if it risks civilian casualties." "Rules of engagement?" Jackson asked. "Security personnel or hostile combatants protecting a trafficking operation. Neutralize with prejudice. House staff might be innocent or complicit. We don't know. Minimize force against them unless they actively resist." "Crow himself?" The Master Sergeant's question was flat, professional. "Mine. If you see him, you contain but don't engage. I have questions he's going to answer." Nods all around. These were people who understood the unspoken language of tactical operations, who could read between lines and operate in moral gray zones where the law failed and justice required direct action. "Jackson, you're on the basement door. Riley, overwatch on Wade's apartment. If he moves, you put him down. Maria, with me on extraction. Sergeant, you have roaming support and secondary extraction if we need it." Kale checked his watch. "Execute in 90 seconds. Questions?" None came. The team dispersed like smoke, each operator moving to their assignment with practiced efficiency. Kale reached the basement window he'd used earlier for observation and positioned himself to breach. Beside him, Maria Santos readied a flashbang, her dark eyes calm and focused. 60 seconds. Inside the house, normal evening routines continued. The house mothers were settling girls into bedrooms, completely unaware of the violence about to erupt beneath their feet. Kyle hoped desperately that his team could execute without those innocent children being caught in the crossfire. 30 seconds. Wade's cigarette glow disappeared from his balcony. Through the small window, Kyle saw one of the basement guards check his phone, then say something to his companion. Both men shifted, hands going to weapons. They'd received word about the warehouse fire. Were they being recalled to respond? 10 seconds. Kale pulled his glass-breaking tool, angling it against the window's corner where the impact would be quietest but still effective. 5 seconds. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat and the absolute clarity that came before violence. 0. Cale struck the window. Glass shattered with a crack that sounded like thunder in his ears but barely registered inside the basement. He cleared the remaining shards with his tool, then pulled the pin on Maria's flashbang and tossed it through the opening. The world went white and deaf. Cale went through this window in the flashbang's wake, hitting the basement floor in a roll that brought him up with the Colt 45 extended. The two guards were staggered, disoriented, hands clutching at their eyes and ears. He put 2 rounds into the first guard's center mass, shifted, fired twice more at the second. Both men went down. Kyle was already moving, crossing to the steel door where he'd seen Mara. It was locked from the outside, a simple deadbolt that told him she was restrained inside, not a threat worth serious security. He threw the bolt and yanked the door open. Mara looked up at him with wide eyes, blood crusted at the corner of her mouth. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't?" Cale cut the zip ties with his knife, catching her as she stumbled forward. "Can you walk?" "I can run if I have to." She grabbed his arm. "Cale, the girls, they're here. The new shipment arrived 2 hours ago. They're upstairs in the locked wing, terrified and traumatized. We can't leave them." "How many?" 11, plus the 7 who were already here. 18 total. 18 children, 18 lives that would disappear into darkness if they left without acting. Cale keyed his radio, a basic two-way Riley had provided during their brief staging. "Situation change. We have 18 potential victims on upper floors, requesting extraction support." The Master Sergeant's voice came back immediately. "Negative. Too many for current assets. We extract primary objective and call in authorities from safe distance." Every tactical bone in Cale's body agreed. 18 children meant chaos, meant exposure, meant exponentially increased risk of casualties. The smart play was to get Mara out, get the evidence to proper authorities, let them handle the rescue with proper resources. But smart wasn't the same as right. "We're not leaving them," Cale said into the radio. "Varen, we're not leaving them." He looked at Mara, saw the same determination reflected in her battered face. "Leora died trying to save these girls. We finish it. Tonight." Silence on the radio. Then, incredibly, Riley's voice. "I'm in. We don't leave kids behind." "Same," Maria added. "Damn it, Varen," the Master Sergeant growled, but his tone had shifted from argument to acceptance. "Jackson, can you secure transport? There's a van in the garage. Give me 2 minutes to hotwire it." "Do it. We extract the girls, load them in the van, and we're gone before local law enforcement can respond." The Master Sergeant's voice hardened into command mode. "But this goes loud, people. We don't have time for quiet anymore. Riley, suppressing fire on any response from Wade's apartment. Maria, you're on shepherd duty. Get those girls calm and moving. Varen, you and I are running interference. We hold this position until Jackson has that van ready and everyone's loaded." "Copy all," came the responses. Cale turned to Mara. "Where are the girls?" "3rd floor, east wing. There's a matron named Helen who has the keys. She's complicit. I heard her talking with Crow about processing the new arrivals." "Show me." They moved through the basement towards stairs that led to the main floor. Behind them, the bodies of the 2 guards lay still, bleeding out on concrete. Above them, the house remained deceptively peaceful, unaware that everything was about to change. Cale reached the stairs first, weapon up, clearing angles with muscle memory that came from 1,000 similar entries in 1,000 similar situations. The door at the top was unlocked. Why would it be secured from the inside when the guards below were meant to prevent escape? He eased it open onto a hallway that ran the length of the house. Warm light, family photos on the walls, the smell of cookies baking. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Evil wearing the mask of normalcy, so convincing that even confronting it directly, Cale's mind struggled to reconcile the horror below with the home above. A woman appeared at the far end of the hall, carrying a laundry basket. She saw Cale and froze, her face cycling through confusion to recognition to fear. "Down on the ground," Cale ordered quietly. "Face down, hands behind your head. Now!" The woman dropped the basket and ran, screaming. "Helen, they're here! The basement!" Cale cursed. The element of surprise was gone. He sprinted after the fleeing woman, reaching her in 3 strides and grabbing her arm. She fought with surprising strength, clawing at his face, still screaming. Maria appeared from nowhere, catching the woman in a control hold that put her face first against the wall. Hostile or bystander? Don't know yet. Kyle zip-tied the woman's hands. Where's Helen? The woman spat at him. You're dead, mister. Crow will... That's complicit, Maria said flatly. She gagged the woman with a dish towel from the dropped laundry and secured her to a radiator. Go! I've got this floor. Gunfire erupted from outside, Riley's sniper rifle, the distinctive crack of precision shots. Then Wade's voice screaming orders, followed by the stutter of automatic weapons fire. The response had begun. Cale took the stairs to the third floor 3 at a time, Mara right behind him despite her injuries. The east wing was marked by a locked security door that looked wildly out of place in the Victorian home's aesthetic. He could hear crying from beyond it, children's voices raised in fear. Helen, Cale shouted, open this door or I breach it. You have 5 seconds. You can't. A woman's voice from inside, frightened but defiant. You don't have authority. Kyle shot the lock. The door splintered open under a kick that sent pain shooting through his knee, but got results. Inside was a dormitory-style room lined with bunk beds, and huddled on those beds were the girls. Young, terrified, some clearly drugged or in shock. 11 new faces mixed with 7 familiar ones who'd been at the charity house before. And standing in front of them, trying to shield them with her body despite the absurdity of that protection, was Helen. A woman in her 50s, motherly appearance, eyes wide with fear, but also with something else. Genuine concern for the girls, even as she worked for the man who enslaved them. You're scaring them, Helen said, voice shaking. Please, they've been through so much already. Then help me get them to safety. Cale lowered his weapon, recognizing that Helen, whatever her complicity, was less captor than victim of circumstance. We're extracting everyone in this room. You can help or you can get out of the way. Helen stared at him, then at Mara, who'd appeared in the doorway. Understanding dawned on her face. You're her, Leora's sister. I thought they'd killed you. They tried. It didn't take. Mara moved past Kyle, approaching the girls with hands raised and voice gentle. My name is Mara. I'm here to take you somewhere safe, all of you. But we need to move quickly and stay quiet. Can you do that? The girls looked at each other, at Helen, at the strangers promising rescue. One of them, maybe 14 with hollow eyes that had seen too much, spoke up. Are you police? No, Mara said honestly, but we're here to help. I promise you, we're here to help. They all say that, the girl replied. Every adult who comes says they're helping. Then they hurt us. The words broke something in Kael's chest. He'd seen child soldiers in his military service, kids weaponized and traumatized by conflicts beyond their comprehension. But this was different. This was happening in America, in a small town, under the cover of charity and respectability. Maria Santos appeared in the doorway, her tactical gear and weapons painting a stark contrast to the dormitory's false domesticity. But when she spoke, her voice was infinitely gentle. I'm a mother. I have 2 daughters, 8 and 11. If they were here, if they were scared, I'd want someone to help them. Let me help you, please. Maybe it was Maria's tone, or her apparent sincerity, or simply exhaustion from fighting the inevitable. But the hollow-eyed girl stood up. Okay, but if you're lying, if this is another trick, I'll find a way to make you pay. Fair enough, Maria said. She looked to Helen. You want to help? Start getting these girls ready to move. Shoes on, anything they need to grab. 2 minutes. Helen nodded and began organizing with practiced efficiency, whatever moral calculation she'd been running now clearly resolved in favor of action over paralysis. Kyle's radio crackled. Jackson's voice. Van is ready, but we've got problems. Local PD is responding ETA 4 minutes, and I count 3 additional security vehicles approaching from the north. Crow's people from the warehouse, Kyle said. They've figured out the diversion. Sergeant, can we hold 4 minutes? We can hold longer than that, but extraction gets complicated if we're trading fire with police. The master sergeant's voice was calm despite the gunfire audible in the background. Need to move these girls now. Cale looked at the 18 faces staring at him with varying degrees of hope and terror, 18 lives depending on him to get this right. Copy. Beginning movement to extract point. He He turned to Mara. You're on Shepherd with Maria. Get them down to the van, calm and controlled. I'm running rear guard. What about Crow? Mara asked quietly. He's here somewhere. I heard his voice when they brought me in. He's mine when this is done, but the girls come first. Kyle checked his ammunition. 5 rounds left in the Colt, full magazine in the rifle. Go! The movement began with agonizing slowness, 18 traumatized girls filing downstairs with Maria and Mara guiding them, Helen bringing up the rear with unexpected competence. Kyle held position at the 3rd floor landing, rifle trained on approaches, listening to the sounds of battle outside intensifying. Riley's sniper fire had gone silent, which either meant he'd run out of targets or been forced to relocate. The Master Sergeant was still engaging, his commands coming through the radio with professional precision. But the tide was turning, more security arriving, police response incoming, time running out. The girls reached the 2nd floor, then the 1st. Kale followed, moving backward, covering their descent. They crossed through the main hall toward the back door where Jackson had positioned the van. Then Darius Crow appeared. He came through the front door flanked by 2 security guards, his cultured face twisted with rage. He saw the girls filing toward escape and his eyes went wide. "Stop them!" he screamed. The guards raised weapons. Kyle fired first. 2 quick shots that took down the guard on the left. The 2nd guard got a burst off that chewed into the wall next to Kyle's head. Before Kyle's return, fire dropped him. Crow dove for cover behind an antique sideboard, unarmed but clearly unwilling to let his operation collapse without a fight. "Keep moving," Kale shouted to Maria and Mara. "Get them out." The girls accelerated, fear driving them now. They poured through the back door and into the night where Jackson waited with the van's sliding door open. Maria began loading them with practiced efficiency, counting heads, ensuring no one got left behind. Kale advanced on Crow's position, weapon trained on the sideboard. "It's over, Crow. Your network is exposed, your operation is done. Come out." "You've ruined everything." Crow's voice was still eerily calm despite the circumstances. 5 years of careful construction. Do you know how much work went into this? How many people I had to cultivate? How many officials I had to compromise? "I don't care." Kyle rounded the sideboard, finding Crow huddled there like a cornered rat. "All those girls you trafficked, all those lives you destroyed. It ends tonight." Crow looked up at him, and for the first time real fear showed in his eyes. "You're going to kill me. No, you're going to stand trial, and you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison watching your empire burn." Kyle grabbed Crow by the collar and hauled him upright. "But first, you're going to tell me about Lyora Hale. How you killed her, why you killed her, everything." "The social worker?" Crow actually laughed, a broken sound. "She was an obstacle, a very persistent obstacle who wouldn't accept reasonable explanations. So I removed her, simple as that." The casual admission, the complete lack of remorse, nearly made Kyle pull the trigger anyway. His finger tightened on the Colt's trigger, pressure building toward the break point. "Kyle!" Mara's voice from the doorway. "Everyone's loaded. We need to go now." He looked at her, then back at Crow, the man who'd killed Leora, who'd trafficked dozens of children, who'd built an empire on suffering and maintained it through murder. Kale zip-tied Crow's hands with brutal efficiency. "You're coming with us. You're going to confess everything to federal authorities, and if you don't, I'll make sure everyone in whatever prison you end up in knows exactly what you did to those girls." "They'll kill me." "Probably, but you'll die knowing you failed. That's enough." Kyle dragged Crow through the house toward the back door. Outside, the van was loaded, engine running. Riley had appeared from his overwatch position, face painted and rifle slung. The Master Sergeant was executing a fighting retreat, laying down suppressing fire as police sirens grew closer. "We're out of time," Jackson called from the driver's seat. "Move!" Kale shoved Crow into the van's cargo area and climbed in after him. Maria pulled the door shut and Jackson punched the gas, the van lurching forward as bullets sparked off its rear panels. They careened through Black Ridge's residential streets, the sound of pursuit growing fainter. 18 girls huddled in the van's interior, clinging to each other, some crying, some silent, all of them free for the first time in days or weeks or months. Mara sat among them, arms around 2 of the youngest, tears streaming down her face. She met Kael's eyes across the crowded space and mouthed two words. "Thank you." Kael nodded, exhaustion crashing over him now that the adrenaline was fading. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, against professional security and corrupt law enforcement and a network designed to be invisible, they'd rescued 18 girls and captured the man responsible for enslaving them. But as the van raced toward the county line where the master sergeant had arranged a handoff to federal authorities, Kael knew this was only the beginning. Crow's arrest would trigger investigations that would spread like wildfire through his network. Buyers, facilitators, corrupt officials, all of them would face justice. The evidence case containing Leora's documentation was still in police custody, confiscated when Mara was captured. But Kael had uploaded copies to secure servers, had sent detailed information to Colonel Martinez, had created redundancies that ensured the truth couldn't be buried. Leora's death would finally mean something. These girls would finally be safe. And maybe, just maybe, Kael had found something worth living for beyond mere survival. The van crossed into the next county as dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, Black Ridge and its secrets were already receding into memory. Ahead, whatever came next. Kael looked at the girls, at Mara, at the team of operators who'd risked everything to help strangers, at Crow, zip-tied and defeated in the corner. They'd won. Not without cost, not without violence, but they'd won. And sometimes, in a world full of darkness, that had to be enough. The handoff happened at a rest stop 30 miles from Black Ridge, where 3 black SUVs waited with federal agents who'd been scrambled by Colonel Martinez in the hours after Kael's initial call. The sun had fully risen by then, bathing the desert in harsh light that made everything feel too exposed, too visible after the night's darkness and violence. A woman in a dark suit approached the van as Jackson killed the engine. She was tall, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen enough to recognize the truth when it stood bleeding in front of her. Her badge identified her as Special Agent Laura Chen, FBI. "Mr. Varon," she said, her voice carrying the weight of authority tempered by something that might have been respect. "Colonel Martinez vouched for you, said you'd have critical evidence regarding a trafficking operation and multiple victims requiring immediate protective custody." Kael climbed out of the van, every muscle screaming from the night's exertion. 18 victims! Agent Chen's gaze shifted to Crow with the kind of contempt that couldn't be hidden behind professional neutrality. "You can tell that story to the federal prosecutor. Somehow, I don't think it'll sound as convincing once we've interviewed these girls and examined the evidence Mr. Varon referenced." "What evidence?" "There is no evidence because there are no crimes. This is a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control." Crow's eyes darted between the agents, looking for any crack in their unified front. "I run a legitimate charity. These children were in my care legally. This man," he pointed at Kael with his zip-tied hands, "is a vigilante who's manufactured a conspiracy to justify violence." "The evidence," Kael said quietly, "was compiled by Leora Hale before you murdered her. Ledgers documenting every girl you trafficked over 4 years. Financial records proving money laundering. Photographs connecting you to known criminal networks. Audio recordings of survivor testimony. It's all been uploaded to federal servers and delivered to the Attorney General's office." Crow's face went pale. "That's impossible. We searched everywhere." He stopped, realizing too late that he'd just confirmed knowledge of the evidence's existence, which itself was an admission of guilt. Agent Chen smiled without warmth. "Darius Crow, you're under arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy, racketeering, and murder. Additional charges will be filed as our investigation proceeds." She nodded to 2 agents who stepped forward to take custody of Crow. "Read him his rights and process him. I want him in federal custody within the hour. No stops, no communication with anyone." As Crow was pulled from the van, still protesting his innocence in increasingly desperate terms, Mara climbed out to stand beside Kael. She was shaking, whether from exhaustion or relief or the simple aftermath of trauma, but her eyes were clear and focused. "What happens to them now?" she asked Agent Chen, looking at the girls still in the van. "Immediate medical evaluation, then interviews conducted by specialists trained in trauma-informed questioning. We'll need their testimony to build the case against Crow and everyone in his network. After that, we work on reunification with families where possible, or placement in genuine protective services where it's not. Agent Chen's expression softened slightly. They've been through hell. We're going to do everything in our power to help them heal. I want to stay with them, Mara said. During the medical evaluations, the interviews. They trust me. Or at least they're starting to. They shouldn't have to face this next part alone. That's irregular. You're a witness yourself. You'll need to give your own statement. I'm also a registered nurse with trauma experience. Mara's voice carried the same stubborn determination Kyle had come to recognize. These girls have been lied to by every adult in their lives for months or years. They need someone who'll keep promises. I promise them safety. Let me follow through. Agent Chen studied Mara for a long moment, then nodded. All right, you can accompany them through medical and initial processing, but you'll need to give your full statement within 24 hours. I'll be there. The FBI agents began the careful process of transferring the girls from the van to their vehicles, speaking in gentle tones and moving slowly to avoid triggering panic. The master sergeant appeared at Kyle's elbow, his face still painted in tactical black, but his eyes weary. We're ghosts, he said quietly. Official story is you and Ms. Hale performed this extraction alone. My team was never here. Understood. And Sergeant, thank you. I couldn't have done this without you. You saved 18 kids from hell. That's worth bending a few rules and calling in old favors. The master sergeant gripped Kyle's shoulder briefly. You did good, Varen. Leora would be proud. The words hit harder than any bullet could have. Kyle nodded, not trusting his voice. Riley, Jackson, and Maria materialized from where they'd been securing the perimeter, ready to disappear back into whatever civilian lives they'd built after military service. Riley clasped Kyle's hand in a warrior's grip. You need us again. You call, he said simply. Hope I never need to, but if I do, I will. They left in a nondescript sedan, 4 ghosts who'd appeared when needed and vanished when the job was done. Kyle watched them go, thinking about the strange bonds forged in violence, how some connections transcended time and distance. Agent Chen approached with a tablet displaying forms. I need your preliminary statement, Mr. Varen. Start from the beginning, how you became involved in this situation. Kale spent the next 2 hours recounting everything, from finding Mara in the desert to the raid on the charity house. He left out only the identities of his team, honoring the Master Sergeant's request for anonymity. Agent Chen listened with professional focus, asking sharp questions and making detailed notes. When he finished, she sat back and studied him with an expression somewhere between admiration and exasperation. You do understand you've committed multiple felonies, breaking and entering, assault, kidnapping, property destruction. Are you planning to charge me? I should, but Colonel Martinez made it very clear that your actions, while legally questionable, were undertaken after local law enforcement proved compromised and federal resources weren't yet mobilized. She also pointed out that without your intervention, those 18 girls would likely be halfway across the country by now, disappeared into networks we might never penetrate. Agent Chen closed the tablet. So no, I'm not charging you, but don't make a habit of vigilante justice. Next time, call us first. If there's a next time, local authorities better not be protecting the traffickers. Agreed. And on that note, we're already moving on the law enforcement connections you identified. Sheriff Vance and Deputy Chen are being detained for questioning as we speak. Based on preliminary examination of Crow's financial records, we're looking at a corruption investigation that could touch half the county administration. Kyle felt grim satisfaction at that news. Crow's network had been built on the complicity of people who were supposed to protect the vulnerable. Watching it collapse would be its own kind of justice. Mara returned from the medical transport vehicle, her face etched with exhaustion, but something else too, peace, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. She settled beside Kyle on the concrete barrier that bordered the rest stop parking area. They're asking for you, she said quietly. Who? The girls, specifically the one with the hollow eyes. Her name is Sophia. She wants to thank the man who got them out. Kyle shook his head. I don't need thanks. Maybe not, but she needs to give it, needs to look her rescuer in the eye and acknowledge what was done for her. Mara took his hand, the gesture simple but profound. Let her have that, Kyle. Let them all have that. He stood, suddenly aware of how he must look. Blood-stained clothes, face haggard with fatigue, the weight of violence still clinging to him like a shroud. Not exactly the image of a hero. But when he approached the medical vehicle where the girls were being examined, Sophia looked up and her hollow eyes filled with something he hadn't seen there before. Hope. "You came back," she said, her voice small but steady. "You promised to help us, and you did. Most adults don't keep promises." "I'll always keep my word to you," Kyle replied. "All of you. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you again." "How can you be sure?" Another girl spoke up, this one younger, maybe 12. "Mr. Crow said people who tried to help would just make it worse, that we should be grateful for what we had." "Mr. Crow lied about everything. The people here," Kyle gestured to the FBI agents and medical personnel, "they're going to help you for real. And if any of them fail, if anyone tries to hurt you again, you tell Agent Chen. She'll handle it." "And if she doesn't?" Sophia asked, that protective wariness still intact despite everything. "Then you find me. I'll handle it personally." He meant it absolutely, and something in his tone must have conveyed that certainty because Sophia nodded, accepting the promise. The other girls were listening, 17 young faces marked by trauma but not broken by it. Not entirely. Not yet. "What happens to us now?" the 12-year-old asked. Agent Chen stepped forward, her professional demeanor shifting to something warmer, more accessible. "We're going to take you somewhere safe, where doctors and counselors can help you. Then we're going to find your families if we can, or find good homes for you if we can't. And we're going to make sure the people who hurt you go to prison for a very long time." "Will we have to testify?" Sophia's question was sharp, informed. She'd clearly been through the legal system before. "Eventually, yes. But only when you're ready, and only with support. No one's going to force you to relive trauma before you've had time to heal." "I'll testify now if it helps put him away," Sophia said fiercely. "I'll tell everything he did, everything they all did. I want them to pay." "They will," Agent Chen promised. "I guarantee you, they will." The medical team gently indicated it was time to transport the girls to the facility where comprehensive evaluations would occur. As they were loaded into vehicles designed for comfort rather than utility, Mara gave each one a hug and a whispered word of encouragement. When the last vehicle pulled away, she stood watching until it disappeared over the horizon. "I should go with them," she said without looking at Kael. "I promised I'd stay through the process." "You also need medical attention yourself. Your ribs, the concussion, everything from the desert and the beating can wait a few more hours." Mara finally turned to face him, and tears were streaming down her bruised face. "I have to see this through, Kael. For them, for Leora, for myself." He understood. This wasn't about physical injuries or even tactical necessity. This was about completing a journey that had started when Mara first learned of her sister's murder, that had nearly ended in the desert, that had led through violence and revelation to this moment. "Then I'll drive you," Kael said. "We finish it together."
Mamin let day sits.
T. The FBI facility was 2 hours north, a nondescript building that served as a regional processing center for cases requiring federal resources. By the time they arrived, the girls had been examined, fed, and settled into rooms that felt more like a decent hotel than institutional housing. Trauma counselors moved among them, beginning the long process of psychological evaluation and healing. Mara gave her formal statement to a team of FBI investigators, recounting everything from her initial investigation into Leora's death through her capture, torture, and rescue. She spoke for 3 hours straight, her voice never wavering despite the horror of the memories she was reliving. When she finished, the lead investigator, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a recorder full of damning testimony, thanked her with genuine emotion. "Your sister would be proud," she said. "What she started, you've finished. Those girls are free because you refuse to give up." "They're free because a lot of people refuse to give up," Mara corrected, glancing at Kael. "I'm just glad we got there in time." Kael's own statement took less time, mostly confirming details he'd already provided to Agent Chen. When it was done, a federal attorney approached with news that sent satisfaction coursing through his exhausted body. Crow's starting to talk, the attorney said. Not out of conscience, he's trying to cut a deal by rolling on his network. He's already given us names of 3 buyers, 2 facilitators, and a county administrator who provided protection. We're executing warrants as we speak. What kind of deal is he asking for? Cale's voice was hard. Reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. But between you and me, we have enough evidence without his testimony to ensure he spends the rest of his life in federal prison. His cooperation just helps us move faster on the network. The attorney smiled grimly. He's going down, Mr. Varon. They all are. As evening settled over the facility, Kyle and Mara were finally released. They walked to Kyle's truck in silence, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down like a physical force. When they reached the vehicle, Mara leaned against it, suddenly looking fragile in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be during the crisis. I can't believe it's over, she said quietly. It's not over. There'll be trials, testimony, appeals. This is going to be part of your life for months or years. I know, but the immediate crisis, the girls are safe, Crow's arrested, the network is collapsing. The thing that felt impossible a week ago is actually happening. She looked up at the darkening sky. Leora can rest now. Knowing her death meant something. Cale thought about that, about the woman he'd loved and lost, about the evidence she'd compiled knowing it might cost her life. She was braver than I ever understood. I thought her work was just social services, just paperwork and meetings. I didn't realize she was fighting a war. She didn't tell you because she was protecting you, same reason she didn't tell me until the very end. Mara's voice caught. She carried that burden alone because she loved us and didn't want us hurt. And we finished what she started because we loved her. Kyle opened the truck door. Come on, you need rest, real rest, hospital rest. I need to go back to the canyon, Mara said, just for tonight. Somewhere quiet where I can think, where I can process everything that's happened. Kyle understood that need. The canyon had been his sanctuary for years, the place where the world's noise couldn't reach. If Mara needed that same silence, he wouldn't deny it to her. They drove through the darkness, exhaustion making the highway lights blur into abstract patterns. By the time they reached the canyon, full night had fallen and the stars were out in impossible profusion, the way they only appeared in the deep desert far from city lights. The cabin was exactly as they'd left it, untouched by the violence that had erupted elsewhere. Kyle built a fire in the wood stove while Mara collapsed onto the sleeping platform, her body finally acknowledging the toll of days without real rest. I'm going to sleep for about 16 hours, she mumbled. Don't let me sleep longer than that, or I'll miss my follow-up statement. I'll wake you in 12. That gives you time to rest and still make the appointment. Cale pulled a blanket over her. Mara, you did good. Better than good. You saved those girls. We saved them. Together. Her eyes were already closing. Kyle, thank you for believing me, for helping when you didn't have to. I always had to. From the moment I saw your face in the desert. He said it quietly, not sure if she was still awake to hear it, but she smiled, a small expression that softened the bruises and made her look like Leora in a way that no longer hurt to see. She loved you so much. I understand why. Sleep claimed her before Kyle could respond. He settled into his chair, keeping watch the way he had those first nights after finding her. But this time there was no immediate threat. No enemy hunting them through the darkness. This time the watch was just about being present, being there if needed. He thought about the past week, about how his carefully constructed isolation had been shattered by a dying woman in the desert, how everything he'd tried to leave behind, the violence, the tactical thinking, the willingness to stand against evil with direct action, had come roaring back when circumstances demanded it. But this time felt different. In his military service, the violence had been abstract, directed at enemies he didn't know for causes he only partially understood. This time, he'd fought for something concrete and immediate. 18 girls who had names and faces and futures that deserved protection. And for Leora's memory, for the woman who'd shown him that life could be about more than just surviving. His phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Martinez. Evidence received and authenticated. Federal task force being assembled. This is going to shake the entire region. Well done, KL. She would be proud. He read the message twice, then set the phone aside. Pride wasn't what he was looking for. Justice was enough. Knowing that Leora's death had finally been acknowledged as murder rather than accident, that her investigation had borne fruit, that the girls she'd died trying to save were finally safe, that was enough. Cale dozed in his chair as the night deepened, surfacing occasionally to check on Mara and tend the fire. At some point near dawn, she stirred and spoke without opening her eyes. I can't go back to my life in New Mexico. Not after this. Where will you go? I don't know. Somewhere I can make a difference. Somewhere I can finish Leora's work, not with one operation, but with all of them. There are so many girls still out there, so many networks still running. Her eyes opened, finding his in the dim firelight. Will you help me? Kyle considered the question, everything it implied. Leaving the canyon, engaging with the world again, committing to a cause that would demand everything he had to give, and more. The safe choice was to say no, to help Mara find her path, and then retreat back to his isolation. But safety had stopped being enough the moment he'd found her in the desert. Yes, he said simply. I'll help you. Relief washed across her face. Thank you. I couldn't do this alone. You're not alone, you never were. Mara slept again, and this time when Kyle dozed, he dreamed of Leora. She stood in a field of desert flowers that bloomed after rare rains, her face peaceful, her eyes warm with the love he'd never properly acknowledged while she lived. You did good, she said in the dream. Both of you. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, Kyle replied. You weren't supposed to save me. You were supposed to live, to keep going, to find purpose again. That's what you've done. Dream Leora smiled. And you'll keep doing it. With Mara, saving others. That's your redemption, Kyle. Not running from darkness, but standing against it. The dream faded, but the peace it brought remained. When Kale woke to full daylight streaming through the cabin windows, something in his chest felt lighter than it had in 5 years. Mara was already awake, moving carefully but with increasing confidence. She'd found one of his t-shirts and was wearing it with her jeans, looking young and determined and ready for whatever came next. I've been thinking, she said as Kyle stirred, about what happens after the trials, after Crow's network is dismantled. There'll be other networks, other Crows. The work doesn't end. No, it doesn't. I want to create something, a foundation, maybe, or an organization, something dedicated to finding trafficked children and bringing them home. Using Leora's methods, careful documentation, building cases that can't be dismissed, going around corrupt local authorities to federal resources. Her eyes were bright with purpose. I want to make Leora's legacy about more than just one case. I want it to be the start of something bigger. That'll take resources, funding, personnel, legal support. I know, but Leora's evidence is going to expose a network that spans multiple states. When it all comes out in trials, there'll be attention, media coverage. If we leverage that correctly, we can build something sustainable. Mara sat down across from him. I want you to be part of it, not just as a helper, but as a partner. Your tactical skills, your understanding of how these operations work, that's invaluable. Cale thought about the life he'd built in this canyon, the isolation he'd convinced himself was healing. Then he thought about Sophia and the 17 other girls, about Leora's determined investigation, about Mara's refusal to let her sister's death be meaningless. All right, he said, let's build it. Let's make it count. They spent the morning planning, mapping out ideas that ranged from practical to ambitious. By the time they needed to leave for Mara's follow-up statement, they had the skeleton of a plan that felt possible, even if it would take years to fully realize. The drive back to the FBI facility was different from the previous night's journey. They talked about possibilities rather than problems, about futures rather than past trauma. When they arrived, Agent Chen was waiting with news that made everything feel even more real. We've arrested 17 people connected to Crow's network, she said. Buyers, facilitators, corrupt officials. The evidence you provided has blown this wide open. We're looking at the largest trafficking prosecution in Arizona history. What about the girls? Mara asked. The ones we rescued, are they okay? They're being cared for. Several have already been reunified with families. Others are in protective foster care while we locate relatives or permanent placements. They're safe, Ms. Hale. Because of you and Mr. Varon, they're safe. That afternoon, Mara gave additional testimony that filled in details investigators needed for their prosecutions. Cale spent the time with Sophia and several other girls who'd requested to see him, answering their questions about what happened next, providing the reassurance that only someone who'd physically pulled them from danger could offer. When evening came and they were finally released, Kyle and Mara stood in the parking lot watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The same colors that had marked their first dawn after the rescue, as if the world was offering symmetry. "What do we do now?" Mara asked. "Now we go back to the canyon, pack up what we need, and start building something that matters." Cale looked at her, seeing not Leora's ghost, but Mara herself, strong, determined, scarred, but not broken. "We finish what Leora started, and we make sure it never stops." They drove back to the canyon as night fell, the darkness no longer threatening but simply present, a neutral force that surrounded them without oppressing them. When they reached the cabin, they worked together packing supplies, preparing for a future that would take them far from this sanctuary, but never completely away from its lessons. The silence that had been Kyle's refuge for years felt different now. Not empty, but full of potential, not hiding, but preparing. As they loaded the truck, Mara paused and looked up at the stars that carpeted the canyon sky. "Do you think she knows that we finished it?" Cale thought about his dream, about Leora's peaceful expression. "Yes, I think she knows." "Good." Mara climbed into the truck. "Then let's go build something she'd be proud of." They left the canyon in the pre-dawn darkness, heading toward Phoenix, where Colonel Martinez had arranged meetings with federal prosecutors, victim advocacy groups, and potential funding sources for the foundation Mara envisioned. The road stretched ahead, long and uncertain, but no longer lonely. Somewhere in that road's future were trials and testimonies, the careful construction of an organization dedicated to finding and rescuing trafficked children, the hard work of turning tragedy into triumph. There would be setbacks and victories, darkness and light, all of it necessary and all of it meaningful. But for now, there was just the drive and the dawn, and two people who'd found purpose in the midst of horror. Two people who'd learned that running from darkness only gave it power, while standing against it, even at terrible cost, could create light. Kyle glanced at Mara, who'd fallen asleep against the window as exhaustion finally claimed her completely. Her face was still bruised, still marked by violence, but peaceful in rest. She'd come to Arizona seeking answers about her sister's death and found them, along with a mission that would define the rest of her life. He'd been hiding in a canyon seeking peace and found it impossible to maintain once he'd seen evil wearing a respectable face. But in abandoning his isolation, he'd discovered something better than peace: purpose. The highway stretched ahead through the desert as morning light slowly painted the landscape in warm tones. Behind them, Blackridge would be waking to news of arrests and exposed corruption, a small town forced to confront the darkness it had allowed to flourish in its midst. Ahead, 18 girls would be starting their long journey toward healing, carrying trauma, but also the knowledge that people had fought for them, had risked everything to bring them home. And Leora's evidence would continue doing the work she'd died to ensure it could do, exposing evil, protecting the vulnerable, ensuring that her death had meaning beyond tragedy. The wind carried no more ghosts. It carried something new: justice, renewal, and the promise that some battles, even the hardest ones, could be won. Kyle drove toward that promise, toward whatever came next, no longer running but finally, truly moving forward. The desert forgave. Eventually. And sometimes, if you were willing to stand against the darkness, it gave something back. Not peace necessarily, but purpose. And that in the end was enough.